waitress saw an 8-year-old girl terrified along with her father. As she approached, the girl slipped her a note. When she read, "Please help me," she immediately called 911. The rain hammered against the windows of Harborview Diner with the persistent rhythm of a metronome gone mad. Diane Walker wiped her hands on her faded blue apron and gazed out at the gray afternoon. October in Brightport, Maine brought with it the kind of weather that warned of the long winter ahead. Bitter wind that found every crack in the old building's weathered facade. Rain that seemed determined to drown any lingering tourists brave enough to visit the coastal town this late in the season. "Coffee's ready, Eddie," she called to the short-order cook without looking back at the kitchen window. After 6 years at the diner, she knew Eddie's schedule down to the minute. Fresh pot at 3:15. Right after the lunch rush ended but before the early dinner crowd of retirees began to trickle in. The diner sat in that afternoon lull now, occupied only by Thomas Grady nursing his third cup by the counter, and a pair of salesmen in ill-fitting suits hunched over half-eaten Reubens. "Thanks, D," Eddie grunted, his voice barely audible over the wheezing exhaust fan above the grill. "You heard from Jack yet? Storm's supposed to pick up later." Diane pulled her phone from her apron pocket, checking for messages from her son's basketball coach. Nothing yet. Probably trying to squeeze in practice before it gets worse. At 10 years old, Jack was fiercely independent, insisting he could walk the 6 blocks from school to the community center alone, and then the 3 blocks from there to the diner when practice ended. Diane had relented, but days like this, with the sky the color of bruised fruit and the weather report warning of coastal flooding, made her question her decision. The bell above the door jingled, pulling her attention back to the present. A man entered, holding the hand of a young girl who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Both were soaked despite the umbrella the man quickly collapsed and placed in the stand by the door. The girl's blonde hair hung in wet strings around her pale face, and she kept her eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. "Welcome to Harborview," Diane said automatically, grabbing 2 laminated menus. "Sit anywhere you like." The man nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Thanks. How about over there?" He gestured toward the booth farthest from the door, tucked into the corner with a view of both the parking lot and the kitchen. Smart choice if you're watching for someone, Diane thought, or if you don't want to be watched. As they walked to the booth, Diane noticed the man's hand move from the girl's palm to her upper arm, his fingers pressing into the fabric of her purple jacket just a little too firmly. The girl winced, almost imperceptibly, but Diane caught it, the slight tightening around her eyes, the set of her small jaw. "There we go, Emma," the man said as they reached the booth, his voice jovial but somehow hollow. "Isn't this nice and cozy?" The girl, Emma, slid into the booth without responding. She kept her hands folded in her lap, shoulders hunched forward beneath her damp jacket. Up close, Diane could see dark circles beneath the child's eyes, stark against skin that had the pallor of someone who hadn't seen much sunlight recently. "Can I start you folks with something to drink?" Diane asked, placing the menus on the table. "Hot chocolate might be good on a day like this," she added, directing the suggestion toward Emma with a gentle smile. Before the girl could respond, the man answered, "She'll have a glass of water. I'll take coffee. Black." "You got it," Diane said, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the discomfort creeping up her spine. Something felt off. The way the man positioned himself across from the girl but angled so he could see the door. The way the child seemed to make herself smaller in his presence. The conspicuous absence of any familial warmth between them. As she walked away, Diane heard the man speaking to Emma in low, stern tones. "Remember what we talked about, princess. We're just passing through. No need to bother the nice waitress with conversation." Diane poured the coffee with practiced precision, then filled a glass of water, adding a lemon wedge and a colorful straw, the kind that always made Jack smile when he was younger. When she returned to the table, the man was scrolling through his phone while Emma stared out the window, her small fingers tracing invisible patterns on the table's surface. "Here you go," Diane said, setting down the drinks. "Ready to order? Or do you need a minute?" "We'll need a minute," the man replied without looking up from his phone. "No problem. I'll check back." She turned her attention to Emma. "That's a pretty bracelet," she said, noticing the woven friendship bracelet on the girl's wrist. The only splash of color about her besides the purple jacket. Emma's eyes flickered up briefly, something unreadable passing through them before she quickly looked down again. "Thank you," she whispered. So softly Diane almost missed it. The man's head snapped up. "Emma doesn't like to talk much. Do you, sweetheart?" His tone was light, but there was an edge to it that made the hair on Diane's arms stand up. "She's shy around strangers." "Of course," Diane nodded, backing away. "Take your time with the menus." From behind the counter, she watched them while pretending to organize the silverware rack. The man spoke occasionally, his mouth close to Emma's ear, while the child nodded mechanically. Not once did she smile or speak above a whisper. Diane had raised a child. She knew the difference between shyness and fear. This wasn't a timid child, this was a terrified one. Her thoughts were interrupted when the man's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "I need to take this," he said to Emma. "Stay put." He slid out of the booth and walked toward the front door, pushing it open and stepping under the small awning just outside. Through the rain-streaked window, Diane could see him pacing back and forth, one hand gesticulating as he spoke into the phone, his eyes regularly darting back to check on Emma through the glass. Diane moved quickly, approaching the table with the coffee pot. "Refill for your dad?" she asked, knowing instinctively the answer before Emma gave a slight shake of her head. "He's not," Emma began, then stopped herself, eyes widening in alarm. "Is everything okay, sweetie?" Diane asked, lowering her voice. The girl's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass, nearly knocking it over. Outside, the man was still engrossed in his heated conversation. His back momentarily turned to the window. Emma's eyes darted to him, then back to Diane. In that moment, a decision seemed to crystallize behind her blue eyes. With movements so quick and practiced they suggested rehearsal, she slipped a folded napkin from her lap and slid it across the table. "Please," she whispered, the single word carrying the weight of a scream. Diane let her hand fall casually over the napkin, sliding it into her apron pocket in one smooth motion as the man turned back toward the diner. She gave Emma a nearly imperceptible nod before moving away, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. In the narrow hallway that led to the restrooms, Diane unfolded the napkin with shaking fingers. For words were scrawled in blue crayon, the letters uneven but unmistakable. "Please help me. Kidnapped." Blood rushed in her ears as she stared at the message. She flattened her palm against the wall, steadying herself. Through the small window in the kitchen door, she could see the man still outside on his phone, but his conversation appeared to be winding down. "Think, Diane," she muttered to herself. If she called the police now and they came in with sirens blazing, the man might panic. With Emma. Panic while holding Emma. "Eddie," she called, pushing through the kitchen door. "I need your phone." Eddie looked up from the grill, brow furrowed. "What's wrong with yours?" "Battery's dead." The lie came easily, necessary. Just for a second. Once in possession of Eddie's phone, not her own, which the man might have seen her using earlier, Diane slipped into the small office behind the kitchen. With the door closed, she dialed 911, keeping her voice low and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. 911, what's your emergency? This is Diane Walker at Harborview Diner on Coastal Route 1. There's a young girl here with a man who's not her father. She passed me a note saying she's been kidnapped. Diane swallowed hard. He's watching her closely. Please send someone, but no sirens. He's right by the door and could run with her. The dispatcher's voice remained professionally calm. We're sending officers now. Can you describe them both? Diane provided the descriptions as quickly and thoroughly as possible, then added, he went outside to take a phone call, but he's watching her through the window. I don't have much time. Try to keep them there if possible, but don't put yourself or anyone else at risk. Officers are en route, less than 5 minutes out. I understand. Diane ended the call and took a deep breath, composing herself before returning Eddie's phone and heading back out to the dining area. The man had just settled back into the booth when she approached, coffee pot in hand. Sorry about the wait. Refill. Sure, he replied, sliding his cup toward her. And we're ready to order. Emma wants the grilled cheese, and I'll have the club sandwich. Emma hadn't touched her menu. Diane doubted the girl had been asked what she wanted at all. Great choice, Diane said, writing down the order with deliberate slowness. Our grilled cheese comes with either fries or fruit cup. Which would you prefer, Emma? Before the man could answer, Emma whispered, Fruit, please. A flash of irritation crossed the man's face, quickly replaced by a tight smile. She loves fruit, don't you, princess? Emma nodded, her gaze fixed on the table. I'll get this right in, Diane said, moving toward the kitchen. As she passed the window, she noticed a sedan pulling into the parking lot. Unmarked, but with the unmistakable outline of a spotlight mounted on the driver's side. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by a new wave of tension. The next few minutes would be crucial. She handed the order to Eddie, then busied herself refilling salt shakers at the counter, keeping the man and Emma in her peripheral vision. The bell above the door jingled again, and two people entered. A woman in plain clothes with short dark hair and a badge clipped to her belt, and a uniformed officer who positioned himself near the door. The man's reaction was immediate and alarming. His posture stiffened, his gaze locking on the badge at the woman's hip. In one fluid motion, he was on his feet, grabbing Emma's arm and yanking her from the booth. We need to go now, he hissed, already backing toward the short hallway that led to the restrooms, and the service exit beyond. Sir, please stay seated, the plainclothes officer called, her hand moving to her hip as she started forward. Everything happened at once. The uniform by the door moved to block the front exit. Thomas Grady, the regular at the counter, knocked over his coffee mug in surprise, sending the dark liquid cascading across the floor. The salesman at the table ducked down, one of them shouting in alarm. The man dragged Emma toward the back, her sneakers slipping on the linoleum as she tried to keep up. Diane watched in horror as he shoved through the service door, practically carrying the child now. He's going out the back, Diane shouted, pointing toward the exit that led to the narrow alley behind the diner. The female officer sprinted after them, radio in hand, calling for backup. The uniform followed, leaving the front door momentarily unguarded. Through the window, Diane could see a patrol car pulling into the lot, lights flashing but sirens silent. She moved on instinct, rushing to the service exit and pushing through into the rain-soaked alley. The downpour had intensified, turning the narrow passage into a flowing stream of murky water. Through the curtain of rain, she could make out the officers at the far end, scanning the area beyond, but the man and Emma were nowhere in sight. Diane turned back into the diner, heart sinking. They were gone. The monster had Emma, and the storm was getting worse. Later, sitting in a hard plastic chair at the Brightport police station, Diane described everything she could remember to Detective Olivia Martinez, the dark-haired officer who'd entered the diner. You did everything right, Martinez assured her, closing her notebook. If you hadn't called when you did, if you hadn't noticed the signs, we might never have known she was missing. But he got away with her, Diane said, voice cracking. That poor little girl. Martinez leaned forward, her expression intense. We have a description of the vehicle now, a dark blue SUV, main plates. We've issued an Amber Alert and have patrols searching every road out of Brightport. The rain is making it difficult, but we've also got his face from your security camera. It's being circulated to every law enforcement agency in New England. Do you know who she is? Diane asked, thinking of Emma's solemn face, the fear in her eyes when she'd passed the note. We believe she's Emma Reynolds, reported missing from Portland 3 days ago. She was supposed to be with her father for the weekend, but he's in the hospital. Staged car accident, we think, to create confusion about her whereabouts. Martinez's jaw tightened. The man you saw is Robert Caldwell, though that's probably not his real name. He has a history of similar crimes in other states. Diane felt sick. What does he want with her? Martinez hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Based on intelligence from other agencies, we believe he's part of a trafficking network. He likely planned to take her across the Canadian border. "Oh God," Diane whispered, thinking of Jack, safe at home with her mother watching over him. The contrast between her son's security and Emma's peril made her physically ill. "Your intervention interrupted his timeline," Martinez continued. "He's improvising now, which makes him dangerous but also more likely to make mistakes. And thanks to you, we know exactly who we're looking for." Rain lashed against the station windows, the storm picking up intensity as night fell. Somewhere out in that darkness, a little girl who'd been brave enough to reach out for help was still in the hands of a predator. But now, at least people were looking for her. Because she'd passed a note. Because Diane had listened to the unease in her gut and acted on it. As Diane prepared to leave the station, Martinez handed her a card. "Call me if you remember anything else. Anything at all. And Diane, what you did today saved that girl's life. We just need to make sure she gets back home safely." Diane clutched the card, nodding. She thought of Emma's whispered "please" and the trembling hand that had slid the napkin across the table. "Find her," she said simply. Outside, the storm growled its answer, drowning out all other sounds as darkness claimed the town of Brightport. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour, squeaking in protest with each arc. Robert Caldwell's knuckles had turned white from his death grip on the steering wheel of the dark blue SUV as he navigated the slick coastal highway heading north. Every few seconds, his gaze darted to the rearview mirror, searching for the flashing lights he was certain would appear at any moment. "You've ruined everything," he said, voice eerily controlled despite the fury evident in the rigid set of his jaw. "Do you understand what you've done, Emma?" In the passenger seat, Emma Reynolds had pressed herself against the door, putting as much distance between herself and her captor as the confines of the vehicle would allow. She stared at the rivulets of water streaming down her window, trying to focus on their patterns rather than the man beside her. In the 3 days since her abduction, she'd learned that silence was usually the safest response. "Answer me when I speak to you." The dangerous quiet in his tone made her flinch. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The automatic response she'd learned might defuse his anger. It wasn't true. She wasn't sorry at all for passing the note to Diane. But Robert didn't need to know that. "We had a plan, Emma. A good plan." He swerved suddenly onto a smaller road, the SUV's tires skidding slightly on the wet asphalt. "Now we need a new one." Emma's stomach lurched at the sharp turn, but also at his words. She didn't know what his plan had been, but the waitress had understood her note. For the first time in days, someone knew she needed help. Someone was looking for her. The thought provided a small flame of hope that she guarded carefully, not letting it show on her face. "Where are we going?" she dared to ask, her voice barely audible over the storm. Robert's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Somewhere safe, princess, where no one will interrupt our journey." The use of the false endearment made Emma's skin crawl. She'd stopped believing his early lies, that her father had sent him, that her mother knew where she was, the first night, when he'd locked her in a motel bathroom while he made arrangements. Through the thin door, she'd heard enough of his phone conversations to understand that whatever was happening, it involved other people, money, and getting her across the border. "I need to call my mom," she said, summoning what little courage remained after days of captivity. "She'll be worried." "Your mother knows you're with your father for the week," Robert replied smoothly, the practiced lie rolling off his tongue. "Remember, as far as she's concerned, everything is fine. I've been sending her messages from your phone." Emma's hand unconsciously went to her pocket where her cell phone had been before Robert took it the first day. He'd kept it, occasionally showing her messages supposedly from her mother that she suspected he had fabricated himself. "Now," he continued, "we need to change vehicles. The police will be looking for this one." He gestured vaguely at the SUV's interior. "And we need to get you cleaned up and changed." That waitress gave the police a very detailed description. "I'm sure." Emma's heart sank. He was already thinking ahead, planning how to disappear again. Her brief flash of hope dimmed. The rain intensified as Robert turned down what appeared to be a logging road, the SUV bouncing over deep ruts partially filled with muddy water. Trees closed in around them, their branches scraping against the vehicle's sides like skeletal fingers. "Where are we?" Emma asked, anxiety rising as civilization fell away behind them. "An old hunting property. No one comes here this time of year." His smile widened, revealing teeth that reminded Emma of the wolf in the fairy tales her mother used to read her. "We'll stay the night, make our adjustments, and be on our way in the morning." Through the rain-drenched windshield, Emma could just make out the dark outline of a small cabin nestled among the pines. As the SUV pulled to a stop, her last tenuous connection to the outside world to rescue seemed to sever. At the Brightport police station, organized chaos had erupted in the wake of the Amber Alert. Detective Olivia Martinez stood before a hastily assembled investigation board, studying the grainy image captured by the diner's security camera. Robert Caldwell, age 42, though he's used at least 3 other aliases that we know of, she announced to the room of officers and state police who had been called in. Previous convictions in Arizona and Ohio for attempted child abduction. Did 5 years before being released on parole, then dropped off the radar 18 months ago. She pointed to a map of Maine where red lines indicated possible routes north. "He's smart and methodical." The vehicle was reported stolen from a long-term parking lot in Portland 3 days ago, right around the time Emma disappeared. "We believe he's headed for the Canadian border, but with the alert out, he'll know the official crossings are being watched." "What about the girl's parents?" asked Officer Donovan, a veteran of the Brightport PD who'd been one of the first to respond to the diner. Martinez nodded to a young woman who stood near the door, her posture rigid with tension. "This is Sarah Reynolds, Emma's mother." "Ms. Reynolds, would you like to tell them what you told me?" Sarah stepped forward. She was in her early 30s, with the same blonde hair as her daughter, though hers was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Dark circles under her eyes testified to days without proper sleep. "Emma was supposed to be with her father, David, last weekend," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "When she didn't call Sunday night, I thought—" She paused, collecting herself. "David and I are separated, and the custody schedule is still new. I thought maybe he'd forgotten, or that they were having such a good time." Her voice broke slightly. "When I couldn't reach either of them Monday morning, I drove to David's apartment. His neighbor said an ambulance had taken him to the hospital Saturday morning. A hit and run. He's still in intensive care." Sarah's expression hardened. "Someone deliberately ran him off the road, and then took advantage of the confusion to take Emma from school, claiming to be sent by me." Martinez picked up the narrative. "The school confirms that a man identifying himself as David's colleague picked Emma up, saying there had been a family emergency. He had Emma's student ID number and knew the name of her teacher, information that suggests significant planning." "Why Emma?" Donovan asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Martinez's expression darkened. "Based on Caldwell's history and information from federal agencies tracking his associates, we believe he's part of a trafficking network that targets children from stable backgrounds with no immediate red flags. Children who won't be missed right away because they're supposedly with another parent or relative." Sarah made a small, pained sound, and one of the victim advocates moved closer to her, placing a supportive hand on her arm. "The good news," Martinez continued, "is that we identified him much sooner than he anticipated, thanks to Ms. Walker at the diner and Emma's own courage. He's improvising now, which means he'll make mistakes." She turned to the communications officer. "Do we have anything on the vehicle?" "State police spotted it heading north on Route 1 about an hour ago, but lost it in the storm. We've set up roadblocks on all major highways, but there are dozens of secondary roads he could take." Martinez nodded grimly. "And the storm's giving him cover." She studied the map again, her mind racing through possible scenarios. "If I were him, I'd find somewhere to hole up for the night, switch vehicles, and maybe change their appearances before trying to cross." "The logging areas," Donovan suggested, pointing to the vast expanse of forested land north of Brightport. "There are hunting cabins scattered throughout, most of them empty this time of year." "Good thinking. Let's get search teams organized by quadrant." Martinez turned back to the assembled officers. He's desperate and dangerous, but he still believes in his mission. He won't harm the merchandise. She spat the last word with disgust, then softened her tone as she glanced at Sarah. He won't hurt Emma if he can help it, and we're going to find her before he gets anywhere near the border. As the room erupted into activity, Martinez approached Sarah, who stood staring at the photo of her daughter pinned to the investigation board. A school picture showing a smiling girl with bright eyes and a missing front tooth, taken just months before. "We will find her," Martinez said firmly. "Emma's already proven she's smart and brave by getting that note to the waitress. She's fighting to come back to you." Sarah nodded, touching the photo gently. "She's always been resourceful. When she was 5, she got lost at the mall and managed to find a security guard by herself because that's what you do when you're lost, Mommy. You find a person with a badge." Her voice caught on the memory. "I just keep thinking about how scared she must be." Martinez's phone buzzed, and she glanced down at the incoming message. "They've found the SUV," she said, already moving toward the door. It was spotted turning off Route 9 onto a logging road. The storm prevented immediate pursuit, but we've got a location. "I'm coming with you," Sarah said, grabbing her coat. Martinez hesitated, then nodded. "Stay in the command vehicle. Having you nearby might be helpful when we find her." As they rushed toward the parking lot, Martinez allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. They had a lead, the first solid one since Emma disappeared. Now they just had to reach her before Caldwell realized he was being hunted. Emma sat on the edge of a sagging twin bed, watching as Robert moved through the cabin, securing doors and windows. The one-room structure was Spartan but functional. A kitchenette in one corner, the bed in another, a small bathroom with a shower stall, and a sitting area with a threadbare couch near a pot-bellied stove. The electricity worked, illuminating the space with harsh fluorescent light that made the wood paneling look sickly and yellow. "Hungry?" Robert asked, his tone casual, as if they were simply on a camping trip. Emma shook her head, though her stomach growled in protest. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, the interrupted lunch at the diner now hours in the past. "You need to eat," he insisted, opening a cabinet to reveal canned goods. "Can't have you getting sick before we meet our friends." The way he said friends sent a chill down Emma's spine. "What friends?" "The people who are very excited to meet you." Robert set a can of beef stew on the counter and began searching for a can opener. "They have a special place for kids like you. Somewhere far away from here." Emma's mind raced as she absorbed what he wasn't saying. "I don't want to go with them. I want to go home." Robert's expression hardened for a moment before smoothing into a patronizing smile. "This is an adventure, Emma. Don't you like adventures? You get to travel, see new places. Those other kids who went before you, they're having a wonderful time." "Other kids?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Of course. You didn't think you were special, did you?" He laughed, the sound brittle in the small cabin. "You're just a package I'm delivering. A valuable package, but still just a delivery." The casual cruelty of his words hit Emma like a physical blow. For 3 days, she'd been terrified but also confused by his alternating kindness and strictness. Now the mask had slipped completely, revealing the cold reality beneath. "My mom will find me," she said, with more conviction than she felt. "And the police. They're looking for us right now. Let them look." Robert waved a dismissive hand as he poured the stew into a pot. "By this time tomorrow, we'll be across the border. And a week from now, you'll be so far away they'll never find you." Emma fell silent, watching him prepare the meal with methodical precision. Her mind, however, was anything but quiet. She thought about the waitress, Diane, and how quickly she'd understood the note. She thought about her mother, who must be sick with worry. She thought about her teacher, Ms. Peterson, who had taught her class about stranger danger, and what to do if someone tried to take them. "Always look for a way out," Miss Peterson had said. "Remember details. Be brave, but be safe." Emma's eyes roamed the cabin, cataloging details. 1 door, 3 windows, all now locked. Robert's keys on the counter beside the stove. The storm still raging outside, turning the forest into a dark, wet maze. Not great odds, but not impossible either. Bathroom, she said quietly. Robert looked up from stirring the stew. What? I need to use the bathroom. She stood, pointing to the small door in the corner. He sighed. Fine. Make it quick. In the tiny bathroom, Emma closed the door and took a deep breath. The small window above the toilet was barely big enough for her to squeeze through, and probably locked as well. Still, she had to try. Standing on the toilet lid, she examined the window. A simple latch held it closed. She twisted it carefully, wincing at the slight squeak of metal on metal. The window opened outward, letting in a gust of rain-scented air. Freedom was literally within reach, yet the drop to the ground looked dauntingly high from her perspective, and the darkness beyond the cabin was absolute. Emma, Robert's voice came through the door, accompanied by a sharp knock. What's taking so long? Sorry, she called back. I'll be right out. She closed the window reluctantly, promising herself she'd find another opportunity. For now, she needed to play along, to make him believe she was resigned to her fate. When she emerged, Robert had set 2 bowls of stew on a small table. Eat, he commanded. We have an early start tomorrow. Emma obeyed, each spoonful settling like lead in her stomach as she considered her options. The storm would provide cover for her if she could get away from the cabin, but it would also make survival in the forest more challenging. And Robert had already proven he could move quickly and think on his feet. As they ate in silence, the wind howled around the cabin's eaves, trees groaning under the assault of the storm. In the distance, thunder rumbled a warning, echoing Emma's own turbulent thoughts. She would escape. She had to. The waitress had understood her message, which meant people were looking for her. She just needed to stay alive and find a way to signal her location. Robert's phone rang, startling them both. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening before he answered. Yes, he barked into the phone, standing and moving toward the door for better reception. When? How many? He listened, his free hand clenching into a fist. No, the original plan is scrapped. We need a new extraction point. The girl passed a note at a diner. They know exactly who they're looking for now. Emma kept her eyes fixed on her bowl, not wanting him to see the hope blooming within her. They were coming for her. They knew. I don't care what the others think, Robert continued, pacing now. This isn't my fault. The kid's smarter than we anticipated. He paused, listening. Fine. New plan. There's an access road off Route 161 near the Van Buren crossing. Meet me there tomorrow at noon. He hung up, staring at Emma with such naked rage that she shrank back in her chair. Congratulations, he said coldly. You've managed to complicate things for everyone. My associates are not pleased. I'm sorry, she whispered, reverting to the safe response. No, you're not. He approached the table, looming over her. But you will be if you try anything else. The people waiting for you aren't as patient as I am. The threat hung in the air between them, but beneath her fear, Emma felt something else stirring, anger. This man had taken her from her life, lied to her, and planned to send her away from everything and everyone she loved. And he expected her to be docile, to accept this fate without a fight? Her father, on those rare occasions when he wasn't preoccupied with work, had always told her that Reynolds women had fire in their veins. Just like your mom, he'd say, when she stood her ground or argued a point. Stubborn as the day is long. She thought of her mother now. Fierce, protective, tireless in pursuit of what she wanted. Sarah Reynolds would never stop looking for her daughter, and Emma would never stop trying to get back to her. Time for bed, Robert announced, cleaning up the dishes with brisk efficiency. We leave at first light. Emma moved to the small bed, sitting on its edge as Robert locked the cabin door and pocketed the key. He arranged himself on the couch, positioning it so that it blocked the door. Even if she managed to get past him, she'd still need that key. Sleep well, princess, he said mockingly. Big day tomorrow. Emma lay down fully clothed, pulling the musty blanket over herself and turning to face the wall. She closed her eyes, feigning sleep, while her mind worked furiously through scenarios. The bathroom window was her best option, but she'd need time when Robert was distracted or asleep. Outside, the storm continued its assault, rain lashing against the cabin's roof in angry waves. Emma focused on the sound, letting it calm her racing heart. In the darkness, she whispered a silent promise to herself, "I'm going home." Across the room, Robert's breathing eventually deepened and slowed. Emma waited, counting each breath, each second bringing her closer to the moment when she would make her move. The storm was both ally and enemy now, providing cover but also making her escape more dangerous. Still, if there was one thing Emma Reynolds had learned in the past 3 days, it was that danger came in many forms. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing of all was doing nothing. The police briefing room at the Brightport station had transformed into a command center, with maps covering every available surface and officers from multiple jurisdictions huddled around tables. The storm continued to rage outside, complicating search efforts and creating a sense of urgency that permeated the room. Diane Walker sat in a corner, a cup of cold coffee clutched between her hands. She'd been about to leave hours ago when Martinez had asked her to stay, in case Emma had shared any details during their brief interaction that might prove useful. Now, watching the organized frenzy of the search effort, Diane was struck by the weight of responsibility she felt. If she hadn't noticed the signs, if she hadn't read the note, she pushed the thought away. There was no point in dwelling on what-ifs. What mattered was finding Emma. "Ms. Walker." Diane looked up to find Sarah Reynolds standing before her, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "I wanted to thank you," Sarah said, her voice rough with emotion, "for seeing what was happening, for helping my daughter." Diane stood, setting aside her coffee. "I have a son," she said simply. "Any parent would have done the same." "No," Sarah shook her head emphatically. "Not everyone would have noticed. Not everyone would have acted." She glanced toward the window where rain streamed down in sheets. "They've narrowed the search area to a section of forest about 30 miles north. There are several hunting cabins there. They think he might be holed up in one of them, waiting out the storm." "That's good news," Diane said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "They'll find her." Sarah nodded, then hesitated. "Detective Martinez mentioned that Emma said something to you about a special tree? When you were in the diner." Diane frowned, searching her memory of the brief interaction. She didn't say much at all, actually. He was watching her too closely. She closed her eyes, trying to recall every detail. The only thing she said unprompted was when I complimented her bracelet. A friendship bracelet, woven threads. "The one I made her," Sarah said softly. "We have matching ones." "Yes, that one." Diane concentrated harder. "When I asked if the man was her father, she started to say he's not, but stopped herself. And when I asked if she was okay, all she said was please when she passed me the note." Sarah's shoulders slumped slightly. "I thought maybe—" Martinez said sometimes victims leave clues, and I remembered Emma used to have this game where she'd leave messages for me using our special symbols. "Special symbols?" Diane asked, something tickling at the edge of her memory. "Just silly things. A heart meant, 'I love you.' A star meant help. That sort of thing. She'd draw them on notes in her lunchbox or on the bathroom mirror with soap." Sarah smiled faintly at the memory. "She called it our secret code." Diane suddenly sat upright. "The napkin," she said, eyes widening. "There was something drawn on the corner of the napkin. I thought it was just a doodle, but maybe—" She hurried to Martinez's desk where the evidence from the diner was being processed, Sarah close behind. "The napkin Emma gave me. Can I see it again?" Martinez raised an eyebrow but retrieved the evidence bag containing the folded napkin. "Did you remember something?" Diane studied the napkin through the plastic, focusing on the small mark in the corner that she'd barely registered earlier. "There," she pointed. "That little squiggle in the corner. I thought it was just a random mark, but—" Sarah leaned in, gasping softly. "That's our pine tree symbol. We use it when we're at our cabin. It means home." Martinez looked between them. "You have a cabin?" "My parents did," Sarah explained quickly. On Long Lake. Emma and I still go there sometimes on weekends. It's about 50 miles northwest of here. Martinez immediately turned to the map, tracing routes with her finger. If he's heading for the Canadian border and looking for back roads, her finger stopped on a small blue expanse. Long Lake. It's right on the way to several unmarked border crossings. You think he's near there? Diane asked, hope rising in her chest. It's possible, Martinez said, already reaching for her radio. Emma might be trying to tell us she recognizes the area. She turned to Sarah. Does she know the region well? Would she recognize landmarks? Sarah nodded vigorously. We've been going there since she was a baby. She knows those woods better than I do. Martinez relayed the new information to the search teams, redirecting resources toward the Long Lake region. Good catch, both of you, she said, a glimmer of optimism in her tired eyes. This might be exactly what we needed. As a new energy surged through the command center, Diane found herself silently addressing the little girl she'd met for only minutes, yet who had made such an impact. Hold on, Emma. They're coming for you. Just hold on. Outside, the storm seemed to be lessening at last, the downpour softening to a steady rain. Perhaps the weather, like the investigation, was finally turning in their favor. The cabin creaked and groaned under the assault of the wind, its aging timbers protesting as if giving voice to Emma's own silent distress. She had been lying motionless for nearly 2 hours, tracking the steady rhythm of Robert's breathing from his position on the couch. The digital clock on the microwave cast an eerie green glow across the small space. 2:17 a.m. Outside, the storm had mellowed from a raging tantrum to a persistent, heavy rain. It was now or never. With excruciating care, Emma eased the blanket off her body and slid her feet to the cold wooden floor. Each board seemed determined to betray her with a squeak or groan, but she had spent the evening mentally mapping a path across the room, noting which areas had protested under Robert's weight. She froze as Robert shifted on the couch, muttering something unintelligible before settling back into deeper sleep. The pill he had taken with his last cup of coffee, something he'd called a travel aid, seemed to be serving its purpose. Emma had feigned swallowing her own pill before spitting it into her palm when he turned away, suspecting even then that she might need her wits about her before the night was through. Her sock-covered feet made little sound as she crept toward the bathroom, placing each step with deliberate precision. Her heart hammered so loudly in her chest that she was certain it would wake her captor. 3 more steps. 2. 1. She eased the bathroom door open just wide enough to slip inside, then closed it with agonizing slowness until the latch engaged with the softest of clicks. Only then did she release the breath she'd been holding, her hands trembling with adrenaline. The small flashlight she had pocketed from Robert's backpack earlier, when he was distracted by his angry phone call, provided just enough illumination for her to see her pale reflection in the spotted mirror. The girl who stared back at her looked both younger and older than her 8 years, her eyes huge with fear but also glinting with a determination that reminded her of her mother. Mom. The thought of Sarah Reynolds propelled Emma into action. She climbed onto the toilet seat and carefully unlocked the window, easing it open just enough to let the cool, rain-scented air rush in. The drop to the ground looked even more intimidating in the darkness, but she didn't hesitate. Using the flashlight, she confirmed what she had suspected earlier. A narrow ledge ran beneath the window, part of the cabin's foundation. Emma removed her socks. Wet fabric would be treacherously slippery, and stuffed them in her jacket pocket. Then she wriggled through the window, her slim body barely fitting through the narrow opening. For one terrifying moment, she was suspended half in and half out, the ground seeming to yawn beneath her like a dark mouth waiting to swallow her whole. With a final push, she was through, balancing precariously on the ledge. Her bare feet screamed at the contact with the rough, wet concrete, but she bit her lip to keep from crying out. The rain immediately began to soak through her clothing as she inched along the ledge toward the corner of the cabin, where she had spotted a stack of firewood earlier. By the time she reached the woodpile, Emma was shivering uncontrollably, both from cold and from fear. She climbed down carefully, using the stacked logs as a makeshift ladder until her feet touched the soggy earth. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the reality of her situation wash over her like the rain. She was outside, away from Robert, but now alone in the wilderness in the middle of a stormy night. Move, she commanded herself. He could wake up any minute. Emma oriented herself using the dirt road they had driven in on, knowing it must eventually lead back to the main highway. But heading that way seemed too obvious. Robert would expect her to follow the road. Instead, she turned toward the thick pine forest that stretched out behind the cabin, using the flashlight sparingly to find her footing among the underbrush. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory from their many hikes around their own cabin. Asterisk, if you ever get lost, find water. Streams lead to rivers, rivers lead to lakes, and people build their homes near water. Follow it downstream and you'll find help. Asterisk water wouldn't be hard to find. It was everywhere, streaming down her face, pooling in muddy depressions, trickling between exposed tree roots. Emma picked what seemed to be a natural drainage path and began to follow it downhill, away from the cabin and deeper into the sheltering darkness of the forest. Robert Caldwell jerked awake, his body instantly alert in a way that spoke of years spent sleeping with one eye open. Something had disturbed his chemical-assisted slumber. A sound, a feeling, he couldn't be sure. The cabin was silent except for the steady drumming of rain on the roof and the occasional groan of timber adjusting to the weather. His eyes immediately went to the bed, narrowing as they registered the rumpled blanket but no small body beneath it. "Emma?" he called, his voice sharp in the pre-dawn darkness. No response. He was on his feet in an instant, checking the kitchenette, then striding toward the bathroom. The door was closed. He rapped his knuckles against it hard enough to rattle the flimsy wood. "Emma? Answer me." Silence mocked him. With a muttered curse, he pushed the door open to find the tiny room empty. The window above the toilet open to the night. Cold rain spattered the floor beneath it, forming a small puddle on the linoleum. Damn it! The rage that erupted from him was volcanic, his fist slamming into the door frame with enough force to splinter the aged wood. The little brat had played him, pretending to sleep while she plotted her escape. Now she was out there in the dark, in the rain, potentially running her mouth to anyone she happened across. Robert forced himself to take a deep breath. Panic would only complicate things further. He needed to think strategically. The girl was smart, he'd give her that, but she was still just a child. Alone, scared, and in unfamiliar territory. She couldn't have gotten far. He grabbed his jacket and the high-powered flashlight he kept for emergencies. As he yanked open the cabin door, the wall of rain that greeted him provided a momentary satisfaction. Emma wouldn't last long in these conditions. She'd be frozen, miserable, and regretting her decision within the hour. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness like a surgical instrument, illuminating the muddy ground around the cabin. There, tiny footprints near the woodpile, already filling with rainwater but still discernible to his experienced eye. They led, not toward the access road as he had expected, but into the dense forest behind the cabin. Robert smiled grimly. The little fool was running blindly into miles of wilderness. All he had to do was follow her trail before the rain washed it away completely. "Hide and seek it is, Emma," he muttered, pulling up his hood against the downpour. "But I always win this game." Detective Olivia Martinez squinted through the windshield of her department-issued SUV, the wipers barely keeping pace with the relentless rain. Behind her, a small convoy of police vehicles and search and rescue teams made slow progress along the muddy service road that wound around the western edge of Long Lake. "How much further to the access point?" she asked, glancing at the main Forest Service ranger who had joined them as a guide. "About 2 miles, Ranger Wilson replied, consulting his tablet where a topographical map glowed in the darkness. "There's a cluster of private hunting cabins spread out along this ridge. Some are accessible by vehicle, others only by foot. Most are unoccupied this time of year." In the back seat, Sarah Reynolds leaned forward, her face drawn with exhaustion but her eyes alert. The symbol Emma drew, the pine tree, it's specific to a certain area around the lake. "There's a stand of old-growth white pines that we always visit. They're enormous, unlike any others in the region. Could she be trying to lead us there? Martinez asked, hope and skepticism warring in her voice. I don't know, Sarah admitted, but Emma has always had an incredible sense of direction. If she recognized this area, even vaguely, she might try to make her way to someplace familiar. Martinez nodded, relaying this information to the search teams via her radio. Every piece of data, however small, went into the collective effort to locate one small girl in hundreds of square miles of dense forest. Her phone rang, the sound shrill in the tense atmosphere of the vehicle. Martinez, she answered crisply. Detective, this is Officer Lawson at Checkpoint 3 on Route 161. We've got something you should know about. Martinez's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Go ahead. A convenience store clerk just reported a suspicious interaction about an hour ago. A man matching Caldwell's description came in alone, bought supplies, including children's cold medicine, a map of local logging roads, and a prepaid phone. Did the clerk notice a vehicle? That's the interesting part, Lawson continued. The guy arrived on foot, completely soaked, claimed his car broke down a couple miles back. After he left, the clerk got suspicious and called it in. Said the man seemed agitated, kept looking out the window like he was expecting someone or something. Martinez's mind raced through the implications. He's lost her, she said, more to herself than to the officer on the phone. The girl got away somehow, and he's trying to find her. The realization brought both hope and a new, urgent fear. Emma was no longer in Caldwell's direct control, a positive development, but now she was alone in the wilderness, in dangerous weather conditions, possibly being hunted by a desperate criminal. Redirect all available units to that convenience store, Martinez ordered. Establish a perimeter. If he's on foot, he can't have gone far. And get those search dogs out now. Weather conditions be damned. As she ended the call, she turned to Sarah, whose face had gone ashen. Your daughter got away from him, Martinez said firmly. That tells me everything I need to know about her courage and resourcefulness. Now we just need to find her before he does. Sarah nodded, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles showed white. She knows about staying warm, about finding shelter, she said, as much to reassure herself as anyone else. We've gone camping since she was tiny. She knows the basics of wilderness survival. That's good, Martinez said, pressing harder on the accelerator as the convoy picked up speed. That might be exactly what saves her life tonight. Emma had never known darkness could be so complete, so enveloping. Even with the small flashlight, she could see only a few feet ahead at any given time, the rain and fog conspiring to limit her visibility to almost nothing. She had been moving downhill for what felt like hours, though her waterlogged watch told her it had been less than 40 minutes since her escape from the cabin. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, her body attempting to generate heat through movement as the cold rain penetrated every layer of her clothing. Her feet, bare and now cut in several places from sharp rocks and hidden branches, burned with each step, then grew alarmingly numb. Some distant part of her brain recognized the danger signs of hypothermia setting in, but she pushed onward, driven by the terror of what waited behind her. The narrow drainage pathway she had been following widened suddenly, the ground beneath her feet becoming softer, muddier. Emma paused, shining her flashlight in a slow arc around her. She had reached some kind of clearing, though the darkness and rain made it difficult to gauge its size. A sound reached her above the steady patter of rain, a different kind of water noise, a rushing, flowing sound that made her heart leap. A stream or river. Following her mother's advice had paid off. Emma moved toward the sound, her exhausted legs finding new energy. The beam of her flashlight caught the gleam of moving water just ahead. A stream swollen with rainwater, at least 15 feet across and flowing rapidly toward what she hoped was the lake. She approached the bank cautiously, aware that the rushing water represented both hope and danger. Following it would lead her toward civilization eventually, but crossing it in these conditions would be perilous. She played her light along its length, looking for a narrower section or some natural crossing point. About 30 yards downstream, A fallen tree stretched most of the way across the churning water, creating a precarious but possible bridge. Emma made her way carefully along the muddy bank, her mind focused entirely on the immediate challenge. She was so intent on reaching the log that she almost missed the distant beam of light cutting through the trees behind her. Almost, but not quite. Emma froze, dousing her own flashlight immediately and crouching low among the ferns that lined the stream bank. Robert. He had discovered her missing and was tracking her through the forest. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. How had he found her trail so quickly? How could she possibly outrun an adult through terrain like this? The questions whirled in her mind like the fallen leaves caught in the stream's current, threatening to pull her under. Think, Emma. Think like Mom would star. The stream. It was her path forward, but it could also be her salvation. Water wouldn't hold footprints. If she could cross it and continue downstream on the other side, she might be able to obscure her trail enough to lose him. The distant flashlight beam swung in a methodical pattern through the trees, growing steadily brighter as Robert closed the distance between them. Emma didn't have time for caution or second thoughts. She scrambled to the fallen tree and began to edge out onto its slick surface, using her hands to steady herself as she straddled the rough bark. The log was slippery with rain and moss, vibrating slightly with the force of the water rushing beneath it. Emma moved inch by careful inch, her focus narrowed to the simple, critical task of maintaining her balance. She was about halfway across when the log shifted beneath her, a subtle movement that nonetheless sent a spike of terror through her chest. The tree wasn't as firmly lodged as she had thought. The relentless rain had softened the bank where it rested, and the swollen stream was gradually undermining its position. Emma froze, evaluating her options. Going back wasn't an option, not with Robert drawing closer by the second. But continuing forward on an increasingly unstable bridge seemed equally dangerous. A sound rose above the rush of water and the drum of rain. A voice, calling her name. Emma, I know you're out here. You're only making things worse for yourself. The log shifted again, more decisively this time. Emma made her choice. She scrambled forward as quickly as she dared, no longer concerned with silence, focused only on reaching the far bank before the makeshift bridge was swept away. Robert's voice grew louder, more urgent. I can see your light, Emma. Stop this nonsense right now. A lie. She hadn't used her flashlight since spotting him. He was trying to panic her into making a mistake. Emma gritted her teeth and kept moving, the far bank tantalizingly close now. Just a few more feet. The log gave a sickening lurch. Emma flung herself forward in a desperate leap just as the tree tore free from the bank. Her upper body landed on solid ground while her legs dangled in the icy torrent. For one horrible moment, she felt the current tugging at her, trying to claim her as the log was swept downstream in a rush of white water and splintering wood. With a strength born of pure survival instinct, Emma dragged herself fully onto the bank, rolling away from the edge as a section of earth crumbled into the stream. She lay there for a moment, gasping, her heart thundering in her chest. Emma! Robert's voice had an edge of real panic now. He must have heard the commotion of the log being swept away. Emma forced herself to her feet, ignoring the screaming protest of her exhausted muscles. On this side of the stream, the forest was even thicker, the pine trees forming a dense canopy that kept much of the rain at bay. She could make out a faint path, an animal trail perhaps, leading downstream. Without looking back, she plunged into the cover of the trees, following the sound of rushing water. Behind her, Robert's flashlight beam danced frantically along the opposite bank, searching for any sign of where she had crossed. The convenience store parking lot had been transformed into an impromptu command center, police vehicles forming a protective semicircle around a table of maps and tracking equipment sheltered by a hastily erected canopy. K-9 units stood ready, the dogs agitated and eager despite the miserable weather conditions. Martinez surveyed the organized chaos with grim satisfaction. When law enforcement agencies worked together seamlessly, it was an impressive sight. State police, local officers, forest rangers, and search and rescue teams, all focused on finding one little girl before a predator or the elements could claim her. We've established roadblocks on all access points within a 10-mile radius, the state police captain reported. Helicopter support is on standby, but they can't fly in these conditions. The dogs have picked up a scent leading north into the forest from behind the convenience store. Martinez nodded, studying the topographical map spread out before them. According to the clerk, Caldwell seemed particularly interested in this section of the map, the logging roads around Long Lake. Based on what we know from Emma's mother, there's reason to believe Emma might be trying to reach this area. She circled a section of old-growth forest on the western shore. If Caldwell was on foot and soaking wet, it suggests Emma may have escaped somewhere in this vicinity, possibly from one of these hunting cabins. She turned to Sarah, who stood under the canopy wrapped in a blanket provided by one of the officers. Can you mark any landmarks that Emma would recognize? Places she might try to reach if she were lost in these woods. Sarah stepped forward, studying the map intently before pointing to several locations. Our cabin is here, on the north shore. The white pine grove I mentioned is here. And there's a distinctive rock formation, we call it Dragon's Back. Right about here. Emma knows all of these places well. Distance between them? Martinez asked. From the hunting cabins to our property? Maybe 5 miles as the crow flies, but the terrain is challenging. Ravines, streams, dense forest. Martinez considered this information, weighing it against what they knew about Emma's physical capabilities and the deteriorating weather conditions. A child Emma's age might cover about 2 miles per hour in good conditions. In this weather, over this terrain, maybe half that. If she escaped several hours ago, she could be anywhere within a 3-mile radius of where she started. The ranger finished for her. Without knowing exactly which cabin they were in, that's a search area of over 25 square miles. The enormity of the challenge hung heavy in the air, but Martinez refused to be deterred. We focus on water routes first. All the local streams feed into Long Lake. If Emma is following her survival training, she'll be heading downstream. The rain's finally letting up, one of the officers noted, gesturing toward the lightening sky. Dawn was still an hour away, but the downpour had diminished to a steady drizzle. Good. Get the aerial units ready to launch at first light. Martinez turned to the K-9 handler. Your team takes point. Follow the scent as far as you can. I want regular radio updates. As the search teams mobilized, Martinez approached Sarah, who stood apart from the activity, her gaze fixed on the dark forest beyond the parking lot lights. We're going to find her, Martinez said, not as a platitude but as a statement of fact. I know, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fear evident in every line of her body. But will we find her first? Martinez had no easy answer for that. Instead, she handed Sarah a radio. Stay with the command vehicle. If, when we locate Emma, you'll be the first to know. The forest was beginning to awaken around Emma, the absolute darkness of night giving way to the murky half-light of pre-dawn. The rain had finally slackened to a gentle mist, but the damage was already done. She was soaked to the skin, her body temperature dangerously low despite her continuous movement. She had followed the stream for what seemed like miles, stopping only once to refill her compact flashlight, which she now used sparingly to conserve the fading batteries. The path had grown increasingly difficult, the terrain more rugged as the stream cut through a series of ravines on its journey toward the lake. Emma paused at the top of a steep slope, breathing heavily. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and a persistent dizziness had taken root behind her eyes. She knew these were warning signs. Her body was reaching its limits. She needed shelter, warmth, and rest, but stopping meant risking capture or worse. Through a break in the trees ahead, she caught a glimpse of something that made her heart leap. The silvery expanse of Long Lake, its surface rippled by the light morning breeze. She had made it. The lake meant roads, cabins, people, safety. With renewed energy, Emma pushed forward, descending the slope with as much care as her exhausted body could manage. The stream widened as it approached the lake, forming a small marshland at its mouth. She skirted the boggy ground, keeping to higher terrain until she reached the lakeshore. In the growing light, She scanned the shoreline in both directions. To her left, nothing but unbroken forest stretched as far as she could see. To her right, perhaps a mile distant, a dock extended into the water, evidence of human habitation. Emma turned right, forcing her leaden legs to carry her forward along the rocky shore. Each step was an exercise in pure willpower now, her body operating on reserve energy she hadn't known she possessed. The cold had penetrated so deeply that she no longer felt it as pain, just a profound numbness that was somehow more frightening. She had covered perhaps half the distance to the dock when she heard it, the faint but unmistakable sound of a dog barking, somewhere in the forest behind her. The sound froze her in place, terror providing a fresh surge of adrenaline. Had Robert somehow acquired a dog? Was he that determined to find her? The barking grew louder, more excited. Emma broke into a stumbling run, abandoning the relative cover of the treeline for the open expanse of the rocky shore. Speed mattered more than concealment now. If she could reach the dock, the cabin beyond it, she might find help before whatever was pursuing her could catch up. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel focused solely on the distant dock. Her lungs burned with each ragged breath, her feet numb blocks of ice that somehow kept propelling her forward. So intent was she on her destination that she almost missed the shouts, human voices calling out, growing closer. Emma risked a glance over her shoulder and saw them. Figures moving through the trees at the edge of the forest, accompanied by dogs on leashes. Not one person, but several. Not hunting her, but searching for her. Help! The word tore from her raw throat, barely audible even to her own ears. She tried again, summoning what little strength remained. Help me! One of the figures paused, head turning in her direction. Then another. They had heard her. They were changing course, moving directly toward her now, the dogs straining at their leashes. Emma's legs finally gave out, sending her crumpling to the rocky ground. But it didn't matter anymore. They had seen her. They were coming. Great, racking sobs shook her body as the tension of the past hours, of the past days, released all at once. The first rescuer to reach her was a woman in a Forest Service uniform, her face lined with concern. Emma? Emma Reynolds? She asked, kneeling beside the trembling child. Emma nodded, unable to form words through her chattering teeth. We've been looking for you, sweetheart. You're safe now. The ranger was already shrugging off her jacket, wrapping it around Emma's shoulders as she spoke rapid instructions into her radio. We've found her. West Shore, about a mile south of Access Point 4. We need medical now. Severe hypothermia. More figures appeared. Men and women in various uniforms, all wearing expressions of relief and concern. Emma barely registered them, her consciousness beginning to fade as the adrenaline that had sustained her ebbed away. Robert, she managed to whisper. He's looking for me. We know, the ranger soothed, lifting Emma's small body with surprising gentleness. Other teams are tracking him. You don't need to worry about him anymore. As Emma was carried toward a waiting vehicle, she caught glimpses of the search operation through half-closed eyes. Dogs sniffing the ground where she had passed, officers with radios coordinating movements, a helicopter circling overhead. All of this for her, because she had passed a note to a waitress who had believed her. My mom, she murmured as a paramedic wrapped her in warming blankets inside the vehicle. She's waiting for you, came the reply, accompanied by a reassuring smile. Just a few minutes now, and you'll see her. Emma closed her eyes, allowing herself at last to surrender to the exhaustion that had been stalking her for hours. She was safe. They had found her. Robert hadn't won after all. Robert Caldwell crouched in the thick underbrush, watching the scene unfold on the lakeshore with cold fury. The girl had made it. Somehow, against all odds, she had navigated miles of wilderness in the dead of night and reached help before he could recapture her. It shouldn't have been possible. She was 8 years old, for God's sake. 8-year-olds didn't outmaneuver adults with years of experience. They didn't survive nights like the one just passed. They didn't ruin operations worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Except this one had. He assessed his situation with the detached calculation that had kept him one step ahead of law enforcement for years. The woods around the lake were crawling with police and search teams. Roadblocks had been established on all access routes. Helicopters now circled overhead, their distinctive thwop-thwop audible even over the distance. There would be no meeting his associates at the border crossing now. No payment for delivering the package. No easy escape to Canada and points beyond. Everything had unraveled because of one observant waitress and one determined child. Robert's hand moved to the burner phone in his pocket. One call could still salvage something from this disaster. A warning to his associates to abandon the rendezvous, to erase all connections to him before the authorities could trace them. It wouldn't save him, but it would protect the network, ensure its survival to continue operations when this heat died down. As his fingers closed around the phone, a new sound reached his ears, the excited barking of tracking dogs, much closer than the teams he'd been avoiding. They had picked up his scent, were moving directly toward his position with unerring accuracy. Robert swore under his breath, abandoning stealth for speed as he broke from cover and ran deeper into the forest, away from the lake and the approaching search teams. He had perhaps a 5-minute head start, not enough to escape, but enough to dispose of incriminating evidence. He pulled out the phone as he ran, dialing a memorized number with one hand while navigating the treacherous terrain with practiced ease. The call connected after 2 rings. "Checkpoint is blown," he said without preamble, his voice steady despite his exertion. "Scorched earth protocol. I'm compromised." There was a brief silence on the other end, then a single word, "Understood." Robert ended the call, then methodically disassembled the phone, removing the battery and SIM card. He scattered the pieces as he ran, ensuring they would be difficult if not impossible to recover. Other items followed, a notebook with encoded meeting locations, a USB drive with encryption keys, the cash he had been carrying for emergencies. By the time the dogs and their handlers closed the distance, Robert Caldwell had shed every traceable connection to the network he had served for years. He would be captured, that outcome was now inevitable, but he would reveal nothing of value. The organization would survive, adapt, and continue its operations elsewhere. As the shouts of officers grew louder behind him, Robert slowed his pace, conserving his energy for what was to come. When the first officer appeared through the trees, weapon drawn, Robert raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Robert Caldwell," the officer called, "you're under arrest for the kidnapping of Emma Reynolds." Robert allowed himself to be handcuffed without resistance, his face a mask of calm resignation. They had won this round, but the game was far from over. The network was vast, patient, and resourceful. There would be other opportunities, other children. Unless, of course, the brave little girl he had so catastrophically underestimated managed to tell the authorities enough to unravel the entire operation. That possibility, more than his own capture, was what truly concerned Robert Caldwell as he was led through the forest toward a future of interrogation rooms and prison cells. The reunion between mother and daughter took place in the back of an ambulance parked at the Search Command Center. Sarah Reynolds climbed inside at the paramedics' invitation, her composure finally cracking at the sight of Emma wrapped in thermal blankets, and 4-line delivering warm fluids to her depleted system. "Emma," she whispered, reaching out with trembling hands to touch her daughter's pale face. "Oh, my brave, brave girl." Emma's eyes fluttered open, recognition dawning slowly through the fog of exhaustion and medication. "Mom." Her voice was barely audible, rough from exposure and emotion. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Sarah gathered her daughter into her arms, mindful of the 4, holding her as if she might disappear again if she loosened her grip even slightly. "I knew you'd find me," Emma murmured against her mother's shoulder. "I kept thinking about what you taught me, about following the water, about not giving up." Sarah couldn't hold back her tears any longer. They flowed freely as she rocked her daughter gently, overwhelmed by the miracle of having her back. "You saved yourself, Emma. You were so brave and so smart." Outside the ambulance, Detective Martinez conferred with the medical team, her expression tight with professional concern. "How is she?" "Hypothermia, dehydration, numerous cuts and abrasions on her feet and legs, but nothing life-threatening," the paramedic reported. She's young and resilient. With proper care, she should make a full physical recovery. Martinez nodded, absorbing the unspoken qualifier. Physical recovery was only part of the challenge that lay ahead for Emma. The psychological impact of her ordeal would require different kinds of healing over a much longer time frame. "And Caldwell?" she asked, turning to the state police captain who had joined their huddle. "In custody. Surrendered without incident about half a mile inland from where we found the girl. He's not talking, but we found evidence that he disposed of a phone and possibly other items before he was apprehended. Search teams are combing the area now." Martinez frowned. "He's protecting someone or something. This wasn't a solo operation." "Agreed. The FBI is sending a team with expertise in trafficking networks. They'll take lead on that aspect of the investigation." Martinez nodded, then glanced toward the ambulance where mother and daughter remained locked in their embrace. "For now, let's focus on getting Emma the care she needs. We can worry about the bigger picture once she's safe in a hospital." As the ambulance prepared to depart, Martinez approached to say a brief goodbye. "Emma," she said gently, "you did an amazing job out there. Not many adults could have done what you did tonight." Emma looked up from her mother's arms, her exhausted face lighting with a ghost of a smile. "Is Diane okay?" The waitress. The question, so thoughtful amid Emma's own trauma, caught Martinez by surprise. "She's fine. In fact, she helped us figure out where to look for you. That pine tree symbol you drew on the napkin? It led us right to you." Emma's smile widened slightly. "It was our secret code. Mom and I use it at our cabin." "Well, it worked perfectly." Martinez squeezed the girl's hand gently. "I'll check on you at the hospital later. The doctors are going to take good care of you now." As the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, Martinez stood watching until it disappeared down the road. Around her, the search command center was already transitioning to an evidence collection operation, with teams being redirected to trace Caldwell's movements through the forest. Her phone rang, the FBI team, requesting a preliminary briefing. As she answered, Martinez cast one last glance toward the lake shoreline where a small, brave girl had emerged from the forest against all odds. Whatever network Caldwell belonged to, whatever dark purposes they had intended for Emma, they had underestimated both the child and the community that had mobilized to save her. That mistake would cost them dearly. Martinez vowed silently as she turned to the task ahead. Not just this case, but the entire operation. She would make sure of it. Diane Walker sat in the waiting room of Brightport Regional Hospital, a disposable coffee cup cooling between her hands. She hadn't planned to come here, had in fact intended to go home to her son after being released from the police station. But something had drawn her to this place, a need to complete the circle that had begun with a folded napkin passed across a diner table. "Ms. Walker." She looked up to find Sarah Reynolds standing before her, exhaustion evident in every line of her body, but with a light in her eyes that hadn't been there during their previous encounters. "I thought you'd be with Emma," Diane said, rising to her feet. "She's sleeping." Sarah's voice caught slightly. "The doctors say she'll be fine. Physically, at least." She hesitated, then continued. "She asked about you. Wanted to know if you were okay." The simple concern from a child who had been through so much brought unexpected tears to Diane's eyes. "She's thinking about me after everything she's been through?" Sarah nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. "That's Emma. Always worrying about everyone else." She took a deep breath. "I wanted to thank you again. If you hadn't noticed, if you hadn't acted, anyone would have done the same," Diane said, echoing her words from earlier. "No," Sarah shook her head firmly. "Not anyone. Not everyone would have seen what you saw or been brave enough to act on it. You saved my daughter's life. There's no way I can ever repay that." Diane swallowed the lump in her throat. "Seeing her safe is more than enough." Sarah glanced toward the corridor that led to Emma's room. "Would you like to see her? She's sleeping, but—" "I don't want to intrude," Diane began, but Sarah was already shaking her head. "You're not an intrusion. You're part of the story now." She offered a tired smile. "Besides, I think it would do me good to see you with her, to make the circle complete in a way." Diane nodded, understanding the sentiment perfectly. She followed Sarah through the quiet hospital corridors to a room where a police officer sat stationed outside the door, a precaution that Detective Martinez had insisted upon until they were certain all threats had been neutralized. Inside, the room was dimly lit, medical equipment beeping softly in the background. Emma lay in the center of a bed that seemed too large for her small frame, her face peaceful in sleep despite the bruises and scratches that marked her ordeal. And 4-line delivered fluids and medication, and warming blankets were tucked carefully around her. She looked so small, Diane whispered, the sight of Emma's vulnerable form bringing home the horror of what might have happened in a way that the past frantic hours hadn't. The doctors say she walked nearly 5 miles through the forest, Sarah said, her voice tinged with wonder and pride as she gently smoothed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. In the dark, in the rain. They can't believe she made it that far. She's strong. Like her mother, Diane observed, thinking of Sarah's composure throughout the search operation. A small smile touched Sarah's lips at the comparison. She's stronger than I am, I think. Braver, certainly. Emma stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering but not opening. Both women fell silent, watching as she settled back into deeper sleep. Detective Martinez says they've arrested him, Diane said after a moment. The man who took her. Sarah's expression hardened. Robert Caldwell, or whatever his real name is. Yes, they caught him in the woods not long after they found Emma. She took a steadying breath. He's apparently part of a larger trafficking operation. The FBI has been brought in. The implications of what Emma had narrowly escaped hung heavy in the air between them, too terrible to articulate fully. What happens now? Diane asked. We heal, Sarah said simply, the words containing a depth of meaning that encompassed far more than Emma's physical recovery. Emma will need therapy, support. It will take time, but she'll get through this. We both will. Diane nodded, thinking of her own son waiting at home, blissfully unaware of how the events of the past day had shifted her perspective on parenthood, on safety, on the fragility of the world they inhabited. If there's anything I can do to help, anything at all, please let me know, she said, meaning every word. Sarah reached out, taking Diane's hand in her own. You've already done more than you know. But yes, I think Emma would like to see you again when she's feeling better. You're her hero, you know? She's the hero, Diane countered, her gaze returning to the sleeping child. I just listened when she asked for help. Sometimes that's all heroism is. Really listening when someone tells you they're in trouble, Sarah said softly. Not looking away, not making excuses, just hearing them and believing them. In the bed, Emma shifted again, and this time her eyes opened briefly, focusing hazily on the 2 women standing beside her. A faint smile touched her lips before she drifted back to sleep, secure in the knowledge that she was safe, that she had been heard, that help had come. Outside the hospital window, the storm clouds were finally dispersing, allowing weak sunlight to filter through. A new day was dawning for Emma, for the investigation that would now unfold, and for the connection forged between 2 women whose lives had intersected because of a small act of courage and attention at exactly the right moment. Detective Martinez stood in the observation room, watching through one-way glass as Robert Caldwell sat motionless at the metal table in the interrogation room beyond. After 5 hours of questioning, he had yet to offer a single substantive response, maintaining a practiced silence that spoke to his experience with law enforcement procedures. Anything? The question came from Agent Carlson, the FBI lead who had arrived from Portland an hour earlier. Martinez shook her head. Not a word. He knows his rights, asked for a lawyer immediately, and hasn't said a thing since. Carlson studied the man through the glass, her expression calculating. His fingerprints matched those of a Samuel Whitaker, arrested in Arizona for attempted child abduction 6 years ago. Did 3 years before being released on good behavior. Dropped off the radar during parole, presumed to have fled the state. What about connections to trafficking networks? We're still piecing that together, Carlson admitted. The phone fragments recovered from the forest are being analyzed now. If we can reconstruct his call history, it might lead us to his contacts. Martinez nodded, frustration evident in the tense set of her shoulders. He made at least one call after Emma escaped, before we captured him. Warning his associates, most likely. Covering his tracks, Carlson agreed. But people like Caldwell or Whitaker, whatever his name is, they don't typically operate solo. There's a chain, a hierarchy. He's a middleman at best, and middlemen can be the weakest links if we apply the right pressure. Emma might be able to help with that, Martinez said. She's a remarkably observant child. If she overheard anything during her captivity that could point us toward others in the network. We'll need to interview her carefully, Carlson cautioned, balancing the investigative needs against her psychological well-being. Absolutely. Dr. Winters from Child Services is already consulting with the hospital's trauma team to determine the best approach. Martinez glanced at her watch. Emma should be awake soon. I'd like to check on her before we make any decisions about questioning. As they left the observation room, Martinez's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She read it quickly, her expression brightening. The text recovered partial data from the phone fragments. They've identified a number that Caldwell called repeatedly over the past week, including right before his capture. It's a burner, but they've triangulated its last known location, just across the Canadian border. That's something? Carlson said, newfound energy in her voice. I'll coordinate with our Canadian counterparts immediately. For the first time since Emma had been found, Martinez allowed herself to feel a cautious optimism. The case was expanding beyond the immediate rescue to the larger network behind Caldwell, a web of predators that had been operating in shadows for too long. Her thoughts returned to Emma, the brave little girl who had not only saved herself but might have inadvertently provided the key to dismantling an entire criminal enterprise. All because she had the courage to pass a note to a waitress who had been paying attention. Sometimes, Martinez reflected, the biggest cases broke open not with dramatic raids or high-tech surveillance, but with the smallest of human connections, a moment of recognition between two strangers that set in motion a cascade of events no one could have predicted. As she headed toward Emma's hospital room, Martinez found herself deeply grateful for both the waitress's alertness and the child's extraordinary courage. Together, they had accomplished what entire law enforcement agencies sometimes failed to do. They had noticed and they had acted, and in doing so, they had changed everything. The morning sun, finally breaking through after days of rain, cast long shadows across the hospital parking lot as Diane Walker made her way to her car. Exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight, but beneath it ran a current of something else. A quiet certainty that she had been exactly where she needed to be at exactly the right moment. As she slid behind the wheel, her phone rang, Jack's ringtone. She answered immediately. Mom! Her son's voice was tinged with equal parts concern and exasperation. Grandma says you've been at the police station all night. What's going on? Are you okay? I'm fine, honey, she assured him, suddenly aware of how little he knew about the events of the past 24 hours. It's a long story. I'll tell you everything when I get home. Grandma says you helped save a kid, Jack pressed, curiosity overcoming his initial worry. Is that true? Diane smiled faintly, thinking of Emma sleeping peacefully in her hospital bed, surrounded by people who loved her and would help her heal. I just did what anyone would do, she said, the familiar deflection coming automatically. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't entirely true. Not everyone would have noticed the signs. Not everyone would have acted on their suspicions. Not everyone would have become part of a story that had changed multiple lives forever. I'll be home soon, she promised her son. And yes, there was a little girl who needed help, and I was lucky enough to be there when she asked for it. As she ended the call and started the car, Diane thought about the fine line between ordinary days and extraordinary ones. How a routine shift at a diner had transformed into something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. She thought about Emma, who had shown more courage in a few desperate days than many adults summoned in a lifetime. And she thought about what Sarah had said. Sometimes heroism is just really listening when someone tells you they're in trouble. Simple acts, profound consequences, a chain of human connection that had proven stronger than the dark intentions of those who preyed on the vulnerable. Diane pulled out of the hospital parking lot and headed home, carrying with her the weight of all that had happened and all that was still to come. The investigation that would continue, the healing that would begin, the lives that would go forward, forever altered by a folded napkin passed across a diner table on a rainy afternoon in Brightport, Maine. As the sun rose higher in the sky, burning away the last remnants of the storm clouds, it cast its light on a world that seemed, at least for this moment, a little safer than it had been the day before. 3 weeks after her rescue, Emma Reynolds sat cross-legged on Dr. Eleanor Winter's office floor, carefully arranging miniature furniture in a dollhouse. The child psychologist specializing in trauma recovery observed from a comfortable chair nearby, making occasional notes but mostly just watching as Emma meticulously created order from chaos. "The mom goes here," Emma explained, placing a small female figure in what appeared to be the living room. "And the little girl is upstairs in her bedroom with the door locked." Dr. Winters nodded, noting the significance of the locked door without commenting directly. "Is she safe there?" Emma considered this, her small fingers adjusting the tiny bedroom furniture. "Yes, because her mom is downstairs, and there are police outside." She placed 2 more figurines at the dollhouse entrance. "And the bad man is far away in jail." "That sounds very safe," Dr. Winters agreed. "Do you feel safe at your house now?" Emma's hands stilled momentarily. "Mom put in new locks. And an alarm." She paused, then added with a hint of pride, "I have my own code to turn it on and off." The past 3 weeks had seen Emma make remarkable progress in her physical recovery. The cuts on her feet had healed, her body temperature had stabilized within hours of her rescue, and the lingering cold she'd developed from exposure had finally cleared. The psychological healing, however, was a more complex journey, one that Dr. Winters was carefully guiding her through with a combination of play therapy, art expression, and age-appropriate conversation. "Your mom told me you're going back to school next week," Dr. Winters said, keeping her tone casual as she observed Emma's reaction. A quick flash of anxiety crossed the girl's face before being replaced by a determined expression that Dr. Winters had come to recognize as characteristic of her young patient. "Just for mornings at first. Mom will pick me up at lunch." "How do you feel about seeing your friends again?" Emma shrugged, her attention seemingly focused on arranging tiny books on a miniature shelf. "Okay, I guess. Mom says I don't have to talk about what happened if I don't want to." "That's right," Dr. Winters confirmed. "What happened to you is your story to share or keep private, however you feel comfortable." "Lily keeps texting me. She says everyone knows I was on the news." Emma's voice held a note of resignation beyond her years. "They're going to ask questions." "And you're worried about that?" Emma nodded, finally looking up from the dollhouse. "What if they think I'm different now? What if they're scared of me, or think I'm weird?" Dr. Winters considered her response carefully. "You know, Emma, when something big happens to us, something scary or unusual, it does change us. Not in a way that makes us weird, but in a way that makes us grow. You've learned things about yourself that most kids your age haven't had to learn yet." "Like what?" Emma asked, genuine curiosity replacing some of the worry in her eyes. "Like how brave you are, how resourceful, how you can solve really hard problems even when you're scared." Dr. Winters leaned forward slightly. "Those are amazing strengths, Emma. They're part of you now." Emma seemed to absorb this, her gaze drifting back to the dollhouse. After a moment, she picked up the little girl figure from the bedroom and moved it downstairs, next to the mother. "I don't think she wants to be alone anymore," she explained quietly. "That makes sense." Dr. Winters nodded. "Being close to people who make us feel safe is important." A knock at the door signaled the end of their session. Sarah Reynolds entered, her face lighting up at the sight of her daughter despite the ever-present shadows of fatigue beneath her eyes. The past weeks had been as demanding for her as for Emma, balancing her daughter's recovery needs, cooperating with ongoing investigations, and managing her own traumatic stress response to the near loss of her child. "Ready for ice cream?" Sarah asked, their post-therapy tradition already firmly established. Emma nodded, carefully placing the dollhouse figures back in their storage box before standing. "Can we go to the diner today instead?" The question hung in the air, its significance not lost on either adult. Emma hadn't returned to the Harborview diner since that fateful day. Hadn't even mentioned it until now. The diner, Sarah repeated carefully. You want to see Diane? Emma nodded again, more emphatically. I made her something. In art therapy yesterday. She unzipped her backpack and partially withdrew a construction paper card, elaborate with glitter and colored markers. Dr. Winters and Sarah exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. The psychologist gave a subtle nod of approval. I think that's a wonderful idea, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to crack through. I'll text her to make sure she's working today. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Winters pulled Sarah aside briefly. This is a positive step, she murmured. Emma's seeking to transform the diner from a place of fear to one of gratitude and connection. Follow her lead on this. Sarah nodded, her hand automatically reaching out to maintain physical contact with Emma, who stood nearby gathering her things. A new habit she had developed since the rescue. This need to keep her daughter within touching distance whenever possible. She's doing so well, Dr. Winters continued, her voice still low enough that Emma couldn't hear. But remember what we discussed about hypervigilance. It's normal for both of you right now, but gradually allowing appropriate independence will be important for her recovery. I know, Sarah sighed. It's harder for me than for her, I think. Every time she's out of my sight, even for a minute, one day at a time, Dr. Winters reminded her gently. You're both exactly where you need to be in this process. Outside, the late October sunshine bathed Brightport in golden light, the town looking postcard perfect with its harbor views and quaint storefronts decorated for Halloween. Emma walked between her mother and Dr. Winters to the parking lot, her hand firmly clasped in Sarah's, her steps hesitant but purposeful. The journey toward healing had begun, for both mother and daughter. A path as challenging as the one Emma had navigated through the dark forest, but leading, eventually, toward the light of recovery. Detective Olivia Martinez stood before the investigation board in the field office the FBI had established in a repurposed conference room at the Brightport police station. What had begun as a search for one missing child had expanded into something far more extensive. A multi-agency operation targeting what appeared to be a sophisticated trafficking network operating throughout the northeastern United States and Canada. Caldwell's still not talking, Martinez reported to the assembled team, but we've made significant progress tracking his communications. Agent Carlson nodded, taking over the briefing. The fragments of the phone recovered from the forest gave us enough to identify 3 key contacts. She pointed to photographs pinned to the board. Jason Mercer, based in Quebec. Elizabeth Hartley, operating out of Boston. And this man, identified only as Clark in the communications. Location unknown but believed to be the operation's financial manager. What's the status on Mercer and Hartley? Asked one of the state police detectives. Canadian authorities have Mercer under surveillance, Carlson replied. We're building a case methodically before making any moves. Hartley's more challenging. She appears to be highly compartmentalized, minimal digital footprint. We've got eyes on her apartment in Boston, but so far, her behavior is unremarkable. Martinez stepped forward again. The breakthrough came yesterday, when forensic accountants identified a pattern of transactions flowing through a series of shell companies. She pointed to a complex diagram of financial connections. These all lead back to a foundation called New Horizons Children's Initiative, ostensibly a legitimate organization that places troubled American and Canadian children in specialized overseas programs. A front for trafficking, Carlson confirmed grimly. They've been operating for at least 5 years, possibly longer. Children enter their system through various means. Some, like Emma, are direct abductions. Others are recruited under false pretenses, usually targeting vulnerable kids in foster care or unstable home situations. And the destinations? Another agent asked. Primarily Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, Carlson said, her expression hardening. Once they're out of the country, the children essentially disappear. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Every person present understood what happened to those children, the fates they faced in the global underworld of exploitation. Emma's escape and Caldwell's capture have given us an unprecedented opportunity, Martinez continued after a moment. For the first time, we have direct evidence connecting specific individuals to the network. But we need to move carefully. If we tip our hand too early, others in the organization will scatter and rebuild elsewhere. What about the child's testimony? Asked a prosecutor who had joined the task force. Could that strengthen the case? Martinez exchanged glances with Agent Carlson before responding. Emma has provided valuable information about her time with Caldwell. Conversations she overheard, routines she observed. But we're being extremely cautious about how and when we interview her. Her psychological recovery takes priority. Dr. Winters, the child psychologist working with Emma, has advised a gradual approach, Carlson added. Emma's already shown remarkable courage and cooperation, but we won't risk re-traumatizing her for the sake of the investigation. The meeting continued for another hour, with team members reporting on various aspects of the investigation, financial trails, surveillance updates, cross-referencing with other missing children cases that might fit the network's pattern. Throughout, Martinez found herself repeatedly drawn to the photo of Emma that remained pinned to the corner of the board. A reminder of why this work mattered, of the real lives hanging in the balance. When the briefing finally concluded, Martinez gathered her notes and headed for the door, planning to drive to Portland where she would update the FBI's regional director on their progress. Agent Carlson fell into step beside her. "You haven't mentioned the threat assessment," Carlson said quietly once they were in the hallway, away from the others. Martinez's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "There's no concrete evidence of risk." "Not concrete, no," Carlson agreed. "But this organization has significant resources and a demonstrated willingness to eliminate obstacles. Emma is the first child to escape and identify a network member. That makes her a loose end," Martinez finished reluctantly. "I know. We've increased patrols in the Reynolds neighborhood, and Sarah is being extremely vigilant about security." She hesitated. "But I'm reluctant to alarm them further without specific intelligence suggesting an immediate threat." "Understood. Just make sure your officers know to watch for anything unusual. Unfamiliar vehicles, service workers without proper identification, the standard precautions." Carlson checked her watch. "I need to coordinate with the team in Boston. Hartley made a reservation at a restaurant near the harbor tonight. First deviation from her routine in days. Could be nothing, could be a meeting." As they parted ways in the parking lot, Martinez found herself thinking about Emma's upcoming return to school. A necessary step toward normalcy, but one that would make security more challenging. Perhaps it was time for a candid conversation with Sarah about enhanced safety measures, presented in a way that wouldn't heighten the anxiety already saturating their household. The investigation was progressing, but the balance between pursuing justice and protecting an already traumatized family required constant, careful calibration. A responsibility that Martinez felt with increasing weight as each day passed. The bell above the door of Harborview Diner chimed merrily as Sarah and Emma entered, the familiar sound momentarily freezing Emma in the threshold. Sarah felt her daughter's hand tighten around hers, saw the quick flash of remembered fear cross her face, before Emma visibly steeled herself and continued forward. The lunch rush had ended, leaving the diner mostly empty except for a couple of regulars at the counter and an elderly couple in a booth near the window. Diane, in the middle of refilling coffee cups, looked up at the sound of the bell. Her face registered surprise, followed quickly by a warm smile as she recognized her visitors. "Emma," she said, setting down the coffee pot and wiping her hands on her apron. "Sarah, this is a wonderful surprise." Emma stood very still, her eyes taking in the familiar setting. The same tables, the same counter, the same rain-streaked windows overlooking the harbor. But the fear that had permeated this place in her memory was absent now, replaced by the mundane comfort of a small-town diner on an ordinary afternoon. "We thought we'd stop by for some ice cream," Sarah explained, gently encouraging Emma forward with a hand on her shoulder. "If you're not too busy." "Never too busy for my favorite customers," Diane assured them, gesturing toward an empty booth. "And ice cream happens to be our specialty." They settled into the booth, Emma sliding in first with Sarah beside her. Diane brought menus, but Emma already had her backpack open, carefully extracting the handmade card she had created. "I made this for you," she said, her voice small but steady as she handed it to Diane. Diane accepted the card with appropriate solemnity, opening it to reveal an elaborate drawing of two figures, one tall, one small, holding hands beneath a rainbow. "Thank you for helping me," was written in careful block letters, surrounded by hearts and stars. "Oh, Emma," Diane breathed, genuine emotion making her voice catch. "This is beautiful. Thank you." Emma nodded, a hint of pride breaking through her nervousness. "Dr. Winters, she's my therapist. She said it's good to thank the people who help us. It makes both people feel better." "Dr. Winters sounds very wise," Diane said, carefully placing the card in her apron pocket. "And she's absolutely right. I'm going to put this on my refrigerator at home where I can see it every day." A small smile, the first since entering the diner, curved Emma's lips. "Really? Really?" Diane confirmed. "Now, what kind of ice cream would you like? It's on the house today." While Emma deliberated between chocolate and strawberry, eventually settling on a combination of both, Diane caught Sarah's eye over the child's head. The silent communication between them, gratitude, relief, shared understanding of how far they had all come in 3 short weeks, needed no words. Eddie, the cook who had been working that fateful day, emerged briefly from the kitchen to greet them, his usually gruff demeanor softening as he presented Emma with an extra cookie for the bravest kid in Brightport. The regular at the counter, Thomas Grady, raised his coffee mug in a silent toast when he thought no one was looking. Small gestures from ordinary people whose lives had been touched, however peripherally, by the extraordinary events set in motion within these walls. None of them would ever forget the rainy Tuesday when a little girl passed a note that changed everything. As Emma ate her ice cream, gradually relaxing in the safe, mundane atmosphere, Sarah allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. There would be difficult days ahead, nightmares that woke them both in the dark hours, moments of paralyzing fear when ordinary situations triggered memories of trauma, the ongoing investigation that would require Emma's continued courage as a witness. But there would also be moments like this, small victories, steps toward reclaiming normalcy, evidence of Emma's remarkable resilience. Sarah watched as her daughter spontaneously offered Diane a taste of her ice cream, the simple childhood gesture so beautifully ordinary that it brought tears to her eyes. They were healing one day at a time, and they were not healing alone. Robert Caldwell, now officially identified as Samuel Whitaker, sat in the visitor room of the County Detention Center, facing his court-appointed attorney across a scarred metal table. 3 weeks of incarceration had done little to diminish his composed exterior, though the orange jumpsuit and institutional surroundings contrasted sharply with the polished appearance he had maintained as Caldwell. "The prosecution has offered a deal," Attorney Michael Bennett informed him, sliding a document across the table. 20 years with possibility of parole after 15, in exchange for cooperation regarding the larger network. Whitaker didn't even glance at the paper. "No," Bennett sighed, having anticipated this response. "Mr. Whitaker, I strongly advise you to consider this offer. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Emma Reynolds' testimony alone is compelling enough for a conviction, before we even get to the physical evidence, the vehicle theft, the false identification." I said no. Whitaker's voice remained calm, his posture relaxed. "I'll take my chances at trial." "That would be extraordinarily unwise," Bennett pressed. "We're talking multiple federal charges. Kidnapping a minor, crossing state lines with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, identity fraud, conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Without cooperation, you're looking at life imprisonment, potentially without parole." A faint smile touched Whitaker's lips. "You're operating under the assumption that I'll still be in custody when this comes to trial." Bennett stared at his client, momentarily speechless. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Whitaker interrupted smoothly. "I'm simply declining the prosecution's generous offer. Now, is there anything else we need to discuss today? I have a rather engaging book waiting in my cell." The attorney gathered his papers, frustration evident in his jerky movements. I'll inform the prosecutor of your decision, but the offer won't remain open indefinitely. Once they proceed with grand jury indictments for the broader case, any deal will likely come off the table. Whitaker merely nodded, seemingly unconcerned by this warning. As the guard led him back to his cell, his outward composure never wavered. Only in the privacy of the small concrete room did he allow himself a moment of calculation, reviewing timelines and contingencies with the focus of a chess master anticipating moves several turns ahead. The organization he served was not known for loyalty to those who failed in their assignments. But neither did they abandon valuable assets without careful consideration of alternatives. His arrest had been unforeseen but not unplanned for. Protocols existed for precisely this scenario, though they were rarely activated given the network's usual efficiency. The message had been sent before his capture. Scorched Earth Protocol. I'm compromised. Those words would have triggered specific procedures, contingency plans developed years in advance. The only question was whether the organization deemed him valuable enough to implement those plans, or whether they had already written him off as an acceptable loss. Whitaker settled on his bunk, picking up the paperback thriller he'd been reading, to all appearances a model prisoner accepting his circumstances. But his mind worked ceaselessly behind the facade, assessing probabilities, calculating risks, preparing for all possible outcomes. He had survived in this world by understanding one fundamental truth. Everything and everyone was expendable under the right circumstances. The girl, Emma, had proven unexpectedly resourceful, but she was still just a child. A witness whose credibility could be undermined, whose testimony could be limited by protective adults who didn't want to re-traumatize her. As for Detective Martinez and the FBI, they were formidable but not infallible. They would follow protocols, build their case methodically, operate within the constraints of legal procedure. Those very constraints created opportunities for those willing to operate outside them. Whitaker turned a page in his book, his eyes scanning the words while his thoughts remained focused on the subtle game unfolding beyond the prison walls. Patience had always been his greatest asset. He could afford to wait, to watch, to listen for the signals that would tell him which way the wind was blowing. One certainty remained, however: the organization would protect itself at all costs. Whether that protection included extracting him or eliminating him would depend on variables beyond his immediate control. Until that determination was made, his only task was to remain silent, revealing nothing that might compromise operations elsewhere. The girl had won the first round, there was no denying that. But the game was far from over. Elizabeth Hartley selected a glass of Chablis from the waiter's tray, her manicured nails clicking lightly against the crystal stem. The upscale seafood restaurant on Boston's waterfront provided an ideal setting for her meeting, public enough to avoid suspicion, exclusive enough to ensure privacy. "You're late," she observed as a man in his 50s slid into the chair opposite her. Clark, no last name ever provided or requested, straightened his tie before signaling to the waiter for a scotch. "Security protocols take time," he replied once the waiter had departed. "Particularly given recent developments." Hartley took a measured sip of her wine. "You mean the main situation?" "Precisely. Whitaker's capture has created complications. Complications that could have been avoided if he'd followed standard operating procedures," Hartley noted, her tone clinically detached despite the seriousness of the subject. Taking initiative in target selection without proper vetting was unprofessional. Clark's expression remained neutral, though a muscle twitched almost imperceptibly near his eye. "Agreed. However, recriminations serve little purpose at this juncture. Our priority must be containment and continuity." The waiter returned with Clark's scotch and took their dinner orders, his practiced professionalism giving no indication that he recognized anything unusual about the pair. Once he had withdrawn, Clark continued in the same measured tone. "Whitaker has maintained operational security thus far. No substantive cooperation with authorities. And if that changes?" Hartley asked, delicately breaking a breadstick in half. Clark sipped his scotch. "Contingency plans are in place, but our assessment suggests low probability of compromise. Whitaker understands the consequences of betrayal, not just for himself, but for his sister in Arizona. The cancer treatments for her daughter are quite expensive, I understand. The implicit threat hung between them, neither requiring further elaboration. The organization maintained leverage over all its operatives, insurance policies of various kinds, tailored to individual vulnerabilities. What about the girl? Hartley asked after a moment. Her testimony could be problematic, particularly regarding the planned Canadian transfer. The girl is a child. Clark dismissed the concern with a slight wave of his hand. Traumatized, impressionable, her testimony easily challenged in court. More importantly, she has limited knowledge of the broader operation. Children can be surprisingly observant, Hartley countered, a note of warning in her voice. And this one has demonstrated unusual resourcefulness. Clark studied her over the rim of his glass. Do you have specific concerns about potential exposure? Hartley considered her response carefully. I believe in being thorough. The main operation represented a significant investment of resources. Its failure warrants comprehensive risk assessment, including evaluation of all potential witnesses. The child is under police protection, Clark noted. Any direct intervention would draw unwanted attention. There are indirect approaches, Hartley suggested. The mother works in healthcare, Portland Memorial. Records can be accessed, routines observed, vulnerabilities identified. Not for immediate action, but as a contingency. Clark nodded slowly, the cold calculation in his eyes matching her own. I'll authorize preliminary surveillance. Discreet, deniable, with no direct contact. He finished his scotch. In the meantime, we adapt. The Quebec route is compromised for the foreseeable future. Alternate channels must be prioritized. The Philadelphia operation is proceeding as planned, Hartley confirmed. 2 transports scheduled for next month. Different profile than the Reynolds girl, older subjects already marginalized, less likely to be immediately missed. Good. Maintain standard protocols but heighten security measures. The FBI task force has demonstrated unexpected competence in the main case. Their dinner arrived, the conversation shifting to more mundane topics as they ate: market fluctuations, property investments, a new exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts. To any observer, they appeared to be business associates or perhaps old friends, sharing a pleasant meal with the easy familiarity of long acquaintance. Only in the subtle undercurrents, the carefully chosen words, the occasional loaded pause, did the true nature of their relationship reveal itself. 2 professionals discussing the logistics of an enterprise built on human exploitation, approaching the trafficking of children with the dispassionate efficiency of corporate executives reviewing quarterly projections. As they parted ways outside the restaurant, Clark handing Hartley into a waiting taxi with practiced courtesy. Neither suspected that their meeting had been photographed from a nondescript van parked across the street, their conversation partially captured by a parabolic microphone deployed by FBI surveillance specialists. The game of predator and prey continued, roles sometimes shifting, but the stakes remaining constant. The lives of children like Emma Reynolds, caught in a web spun by those who viewed them not as human beings but as commodities to be bought, sold, and discarded. Diane Walker turned the key in her front door, tiredness seeping into her bones after a double shift at the diner. The house was quiet. Jack was at a friend's for a sleepover, a normal teenage activity that she now appreciated with newfound intensity since Emma's ordeal. The visit from Emma and Sarah earlier that day had affected her more deeply than she had expected. Seeing the child in the diner again, not as a terrified hostage but as a recovering survivor bringing a handmade thank you card, had brought the events of the past weeks full circle in a way that felt significant, meaningful. Diane hung her coat on the hook by the door and moved through the darkened living room toward the kitchen, her mind still processing the day's emotions. She flicked on the light, then froze, her heart lurching painfully in her chest. On her kitchen table sat a single white envelope that hadn't been there when she left for work that morning. Her first irrational thought was of Robert Caldwell Whitaker, somehow reaching out from custody. But that was impossible. He was securely incarcerated, his bail denied given the severity of the charges and the flight risk he represented. With trembling fingers, Diane approached the envelope. It was plain white, unaddressed, unsealed. She opened it carefully, as if it might contain something dangerous, and withdrew a single sheet of paper. The message was brief, printed in a generic font that offered no clues to its origin. Asterisk, your intervention was noted. Such actions have consequences. Consider this a professional courtesy. Remain uninvolved in matters that don't concern you. Asterisk. Diane stared at the words, their meaning simultaneously crystal clear and utterly baffling. How had someone entered her locked home? What matters was she meant to avoid? Was this connected to Emma's case or something else entirely? Her gaze fell on Emma's thank you card, which she had proudly displayed on the refrigerator before leaving for her afternoon shift. The contrast between the child's innocent gratitude and the cold threat in her hand created a cognitive dissonance that momentarily paralyzed her. Then training kicked in, not from law enforcement, but from the domestic violence shelter where she had volunteered after her own divorce years earlier. Document everything. Don't touch more than necessary. Call for help. With shaking hands, Diane reached for her phone and dialed Detective Martinez's number, which she had stored after their long hours together during the search for Emma. As the phone rang, she backed away from the table, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she felt in her own home. Martinez, came the detective's voice, professional even at this late hour. It's Diane Walker, she said, hating the tremor in her voice but unable to control it. Someone's been in my house. They left a note. I think it's a threat. About Emma. There was a brief silence, then Martinez's voice again, sharper now, fully alert. Are you somewhere safe within the house? Can you see if any doors or windows have been tampered with? I'm in the kitchen. Everything looks normal except for the envelope on my table. Diane swallowed hard. The doors were locked when I came home. I don't understand how. Stay on the line, Martinez instructed firmly. I'm sending a patrol car to your address right now. Don't touch anything else. And don't move around the house until officers arrive. The calm authority in the detective's voice steadied Diane somewhat. Do you think, is this connected to Whitaker? To the people he works for? We'll figure that out, Martinez assured her, deliberately not answering the question directly. Officers should be there in less than 5 minutes. Is there anyone else in the house who might be at risk? Your son. No, Jack's at a friend's tonight. A fresh wave of fear washed over her at the thought of what might have happened if he had been home. Should I call him? Tell him to stay where he is. That's a good idea, Martinez agreed. But let's not alarm him unnecessarily. Just say you're handling a situation at home and he should stay at his friend's as planned. Diane nodded, though Martinez couldn't see her. Okay, I hear sirens now, I think. That's my officers. They'll secure the scene and wait with you until I get there. Diane, you did exactly the right thing by calling immediately. As Martinez ended the call, Diane moved to the front window, watching as a patrol car pulled up outside her house, its lights flashing but siren now silent in the residential neighborhood. The sight of uniformed officers approaching her door brought both relief and a crushing realization. The simple act of paying attention to a frightened child in a diner had drawn her into something far larger and more dangerous than she had imagined. The note on her table confirmed what she had suspected but hadn't fully acknowledged, that Emma's abduction was not an isolated crime but part of a broader network of exploitation, one with resources and reach extending far beyond Robert Caldwell. And now that network had turned its attention to her. As she opened the door to admit the officers, Diane's thoughts returned to Emma, to her courage, her resilience, her handmade card with its rainbow and hearts and earnest gratitude. If a child could face such darkness and emerge still capable of hope, still determined to move forward, then Diane could do no less. Whatever consequences came from her intervention, whatever threat now loomed in the shadows of her life, one certainty remained. She would never regret the choice she had made on that rainy afternoon. The simple human act of seeing someone in danger and reaching out a hand to help. Some choices, once made, redefined everything that followed. The note on her kitchen table was proof of that redefinition, a marker of her unwitting entry into a battle she had never sought but now could not honorably abandon. Diane squared her shoulders and led the officers to the kitchen, her fear gradually giving way to a different emotion. A quiet, smoldering anger at those who would threaten her family, who would traffic in the lives of children, who would attempt to intimidate her for the crime of basic human decency. They had made a critical error in their calculation. They had assumed fear would be her primary response. But as the mother of a child herself, as a woman who had rebuilt her life after her own struggles, Diane Walker possessed reserves of strength that would not be so easily depleted by a single threatening note. If they thought she would be silenced, they had gravely misjudged their target. The December sky hung low over Brightport, heavy with the promise of the first significant snowfall of the season. Emma Reynolds stood at her bedroom window, watching the harbor waters darken as evening descended on the small coastal town. 2 months had passed since her ordeal. 2 months of healing, of gradual steps toward normalcy, of reclaiming pieces of her life that had been shattered during those terrifying days. She touched the woven friendship bracelet on her wrist, running her fingers over the familiar pattern her mother had created. It had become a talisman of sorts, a physical reminder that she was connected, protected, loved. Dr. Winters had explained that many survivors needed such anchors, tangible objects that helped ground them when memories threatened to pull them back into darkness. A soft knock at her door drew Emma's attention from the harbor view. Her mother stood in the doorway, car keys in hand, ready for their weekly therapy appointment. "Ready, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle but not overly cautious, a balance she had worked hard to achieve in the weeks following Emma's rescue. Emma nodded, grabbing her coat from the bed. She no longer dreaded these sessions with Dr. Winters. They had become a safe space where she could voice the fears that still occasionally crept into her dreams, the moments of panic that sometimes ambushed her in crowded places, the anger that sometimes boiled up unexpectedly at the injustice of what had happened to her. "Can we stop at the diner after?" Emma asked as they descended the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the renovated Victorian home that had once felt so safe, had briefly felt violated, and was gradually feeling like home again. Sarah smiled, the expression reaching her eyes more naturally now than it had in the early days after Emma's return. "I think that could be arranged. I believe Diane's working today." The relationship that had developed between Emma, Sarah, and Diane Walker over the past 2 months defied simple categorization. They weren't quite friends in the conventional sense. Their connection had been forged in crisis, cemented by trauma and gratitude. Yet there was something undeniably powerful in their continued association, something healing for all 3 women. As they stepped outside into the crisp evening air, Emma noticed the now familiar police cruiser parked discreetly at the end of their street, one of several security measures that had remained in place despite the passage of time. She pretended not to see it, just as she pretended not to notice her mother checking the locks twice before leaving the house, or the new security system that announced every opening door or window with electronic precision. Some things had changed in ways that might never fully reverse. But other changes had been unexpectedly positive. The deeper bond between mother and daughter, Emma's newfound confidence in her own resilience, the community that had closed ranks around them in protection and support. As Sarah started the car, Emma caught sight of Miss Peterson, her 3rd-grade teacher, walking her dog along the sidewalk. The woman waved, her smile genuine. Emma returned the gesture, remembering how her classmates had welcomed her back to school with handmade cards and awkward but sincere hugs, following Miss Peterson's thoughtful preparation of the class. "I'm thinking about joining the Winter Science Club," Emma said as they pulled away from the curb. "Tyler says they're going to build robots this year." Sarah glanced at her daughter, unable to completely hide her surprise at this voluntary step toward increased social engagement. "That sounds wonderful. When does it start?" "Next week. It's after school on Tuesdays." Emma fiddled with the zipper of her coat. "I'd have to take the late bus home." The implication hung in the air between them. Emma was asking for more independence, for a loosening of the protective cocoon that had surrounded her since her return. Sarah's knuckles whitened slightly on the steering wheel, but her voice remained steady. "I think we can manage that. Maybe I can adjust my schedule at the hospital to pick you up, at least for the first few weeks." Emma recognized the compromise for what it was, a step toward normalcy with a safety net still in place. "Okay, that works." As they drove through town toward Dr. Winters' office, Emma observed the holiday decorations beginning to appear in shop windows and along the town square. Thanksgiving had passed in a quiet, intimate gathering at home, but Christmas loomed on the horizon, a more significant milestone in their recovery journey. "Do you think we could get a real tree this year?" she asked suddenly. "Like we used to?" Sarah's expression softened at the question. Their annual tradition of cutting their own Christmas tree at a local farm had been one of many casualties of David and Sarah's separation the previous year. Emma's request represented more than holiday planning. It was a reaching toward joy, toward family traditions that predated trauma. "Absolutely," Sarah replied, her voice warm with certainty. "We'll go this weekend if the weather cooperates." The remainder of the drive passed in comfortable silence, both mother and daughter absorbed in their own thoughts, but connected by the invisible thread of shared experience that had been strengthened, rather than severed, by the events of October. In the small visitors' room of the County Detention Center, Detective Olivia Martinez studied Samuel Whitaker across the metal table. 2 months of incarceration had done little to diminish his composure, though she detected subtle signs of strain around his eyes, a tightness at the corners of his mouth that hadn't been present during earlier interrogations. "The grand jury returned indictments yesterday," Martinez informed him without preamble. 37 counts, including kidnapping a minor, conspiracy to commit human trafficking, identity theft, and a host of related charges. Whitaker maintained his placid expression, offering no response. "Your associates haven't fared much better," she continued, watching closely for any reaction. "Elizabeth Hartley was arrested in Boston last week. Jason Mercer is in custody in Montreal. The financial records from New Horizons Children's Initiative have been seized. The network is unraveling, Mr. Whitaker." A flicker of something, surprise, concern, calculation, passed behind his eyes before he controlled it. "I'm not familiar with those names or organizations," he replied smoothly, "but I'm sure my attorney will be interested in this apparent conflation of unrelated matters with my case." Martinez leaned forward slightly. "Your attorney is aware of the developments. In fact, he's the one who suggested I speak with you today. The prosecutor's original offer has expired, but given the new evidence coming to light, there might be room for negotiation, if you have something valuable to contribute. Such as the identity and location of Clark, for starters, the organizational structure beyond the operational level, the destinations of the children already moved through your pipeline." Martinez kept her tone matter-of-fact, as if discussing inventory rather than young lives. Whitaker's lip curled in the ghost of a smile. "You seem to have constructed quite an elaborate narrative, Detective. I'd be curious to know what evidence supports these colorful theories." Multiple corroborating witness statements, financial records, communications recovered from various devices, surveillance footage, and testimony from several individuals who have accepted plea deals. Martinez didn't mention that Emma's testimony had been crucial in connecting several disparate pieces of evidence, providing context that had accelerated the investigation dramatically. For the first time, Whitaker's composure showed genuine cracks. "Who?" he demanded, leaning forward. "Who has accepted deals?" Martinez allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. "That's privileged information at this stage of the investigation. But I can tell you that loyalty seems to be in short supply among your colleagues when faced with federal charges and international extradition." She rose, gathering her folder. "I'll give you some time to consider your position. The prosecutor's office will be in touch through your attorney regarding any potential cooperation agreement." As she turned to leave, Whitaker's voice stopped her. "The girl, the Reynolds child. How is she?" The question, delivered in what seemed like genuine curiosity, sent a chill down Martinez's spine. "She's recovering," she replied carefully, "and she's well protected." "I'm sure she is," Whitaker murmured. "For now." Martinez turned back, fixing him with a hard stare. "Is that a threat, Mr. Whitaker?" "Merely an observation, Detective." His composure had returned, the momentary lapse sealed over like ice refreezing after a brief thaw. "Children are resilient, but trauma leaves marks. Some visible, some not. She'll never be the same, will she?" "No," Martinez agreed, her voice hardening. But neither will your organization. The difference is Emma has a future. Based on these indictments, you and your associates do not. As she exited the visitor's room, Martinez felt a familiar mixture of satisfaction and frustration. The investigation had progressed far more rapidly than anyone had anticipated, with Emma's information providing crucial links that might otherwise have taken months or years to establish. But Whitaker's question about Emma troubled her deeply. The threat assessment for the Reynolds family remained active, despite no concrete evidence of immediate danger. The same was true for Diane Walker, whose home security had been significantly enhanced following the threatening note discovered 2 months earlier, a note that forensic analysis had failed to yield actionable evidence beyond confirming its likely connection to the trafficking network. As Martinez drove back to Brightport, her phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. "Martinez," she answered. "It's Carlson," came the FBI agent's voice. "We've got something on Clark." Facial recognition picked him up at Logan Airport 3 hours ago, departing on a flight to Zurich. Martinez swore under her breath. "He's running. Looks that way. We've already notified Swiss authorities, but with his resources, he could disappear anywhere in Europe." Martinez finished the thought. "What about the surveillance on the remaining suspects?" "Maintained but quiet. No unusual activities observed. Whitaker remains the key to unraveling the higher levels of the organization, if we can persuade him to cooperate." Martinez considered this as she navigated the coastal highway. "I just spoke with him. He knows about Hartley and Mercer, and he's definitely rattled by the news that others have accepted deals. But he's still calculating odds, weighing loyalty against self-preservation." "Keep the pressure on," Carlson advised. "Every day he spends behind bars is another day for his colleagues to distance themselves from him. Eventually, he'll realize he's been abandoned." As the call ended, Martinez found herself thinking about Emma, not as a victim or a witness, but as a young girl rebuilding her life one careful step at a time. The contrast between her courage and Whitaker's calculating self-interest could not have been more stark. Whatever happened with the broader investigation, whatever portions of the network evaded justice, Martinez had achieved her primary objective. The child was safe, the immediate predator contained, the healing process underway. Everything else was secondary, necessary but supplementary to that essential victory. The Harborview Diner glowed with warm light against the deepening winter evening, its windows fogged slightly from the heat within. Diane moved among the tables with practiced efficiency, her mind divided between the immediate tasks of the dinner service and the persistent undercurrent of awareness that had become her constant companion since receiving the threatening note 2 months earlier. She had refused to be intimidated into changing her routines or abandoning her job, but neither had she ignored the implied danger. Her son Jack now carried a phone with GPS tracking. Their home security had been upgraded with police assistance. She had taken a self-defense course at the community center. Small adjustments, practical precautions, a new alertness to her surroundings, adaptations rather than surrenders. The bell above the door chimed, drawing her attention to Sarah and Emma entering the diner, their cheeks flushed from the cold. Diane felt the now familiar surge of affection at the sight of them, particularly Emma, whose progress over the past weeks had been both heartening and humbling to witness. "Our usual booth is open," she greeted them, already reaching for menus. "Actually," Sarah said with a conspiratorial smile, "we're here on a mission tonight." Emma nodded solemnly. "A very important mission." Diane raised an eyebrow, playing along. "Sounds serious. Do I get to know what this mission involves?" Emma glanced at her mother, received an encouraging nod, then turned back to Diane. "We want to invite you to our house for Christmas dinner." The invitation caught Diane completely by surprise. Her relationship with the Reynolds family had evolved gradually from crisis-forged connection to something like friendship, but this represented a new level of inclusion. "Oh," she managed, genuinely touched. "That's very kind of you, but I wouldn't want to intrude on your family time." "It's not an intrusion," Sarah assured her. "It's a thank you, and—" She hesitated, glancing at Emma. "Honestly, it would mean a lot to both of us to have you there." Diane understood the unspoken subtext. The holiday would be challenging, their first since Emma's ordeal, their first without Emma's father as part of their immediate family. Having another adult present, especially one connected to their journey of recovery, would provide both support and a buffer against difficult moments. Jack is invited too, of course, Sarah added. Emma's already planning a video game tournament. He'll definitely be interested in that. Diane laughed, thinking of her son's recent obsession with competitive gaming. Thank you. We'd be honored to join you. Emma's face lit up with a genuine smile, still somewhat rarer than before her abduction, but increasingly frequent. I'm making place cards for everyone, she announced, and helping with the pie. She's become quite the baker, Sarah confirmed, affection clear in her voice. A skill I certainly didn't pass down. The easy domesticity of their conversation struck Diane powerfully. This normal exchange about holiday plans and baking, taking place in the very spot where their lives had intersected so dramatically. In the span of 2 months, they had traveled from crisis to recovery, from strangers to chosen family. Your usual order? She asked, falling back on the comfortable routine of her job. Actually, Emma piped up, can I try the turkey club tonight? With sweet potato fries. Absolutely. Diane nodded, jotting down the order. Another small sign of progress, this willingness to try something new rather than clinging to the familiar. And for you, Sarah? The same, Sarah decided. And maybe 2 hot chocolates while we wait? As Diane moved away to place their order, she noticed a man enter the diner. Middle-aged, unremarkable in appearance, dressed in the standard winter gear of a New England resident. Something about his careful study of the interior, the deliberate way he selected a seat with a view of the entire restaurant, triggered her enhanced awareness. Probably nothing, she told herself, passing the order to Eddie through the kitchen window. Just the new hypervigilance that had become her default state since the note. Still, she positioned herself behind the counter, where she could observe both the newcomer and Emma's booth, while preparing the hot chocolates. The man ordered coffee and a slice of pie, his manner perfectly ordinary, his interaction with her completely unremarkable. Yet the subtle disquiet remained. She added extra whipped cream to Emma's hot chocolate, topped both mugs with a sprinkle of cinnamon, and carried them to the booth, deliberately positioning herself between the stranger's line of sight and Emma as she set down the drinks. Everything okay? Sarah asked quietly, picking up on Diane's slight tension. Fine, Diane assured her with a practiced smile. Just the usual pre-holiday rush wearing me down a bit. She didn't mention her suspicion. Unfounded, likely paranoid, but persistent nonetheless. No need to inject anxiety into their evening. Besides, Detective Martinez had been clear. Report unusual incidents, but don't let fear dictate daily life. Finding the balance between vigilance and normalcy was part of their shared recovery process. As she returned to the counter, Diane casually activated the emergency alert app on her phone. Not sending an alarm, just positioning her thumb over the button that would instantly notify local police if necessary. Another adaptation, another layer of protection that had become second nature. The man finished his coffee and pie, paid his bill with cash, and left without incident. Diane's shoulders relaxed incrementally as the door closed behind him, her attention returning fully to the regular rhythm of the dinner service, to Emma and Sarah's quiet conversation in their booth, to the ordinary miracle of a Tuesday evening passing without crisis or complication. Later, as she brought their dessert, apple crisp for both, a favorite they had discovered during their increasing visits to the diner, Emma looked up with unexpected seriousness. Diane, she said, her voice quiet but steady, do you ever get scared? About, the directness of the question, coming from a child who had faced terror beyond most adults' experience, demanded equal honesty. Diane slid into the booth beside Sarah, giving herself a moment to formulate her response. Sometimes, she admitted, not as much as at first, but I've learned something important about fear. She leaned forward slightly, meeting Emma's eyes. Being afraid doesn't mean you're not safe. It just means your brain is trying to protect you by staying alert. Emma considered this, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. Dr. Winters says something similar. That fear is like an alarm system. Sometimes it goes off when there's no real danger, but that doesn't mean the system is broken. Dr. Winters sounds very wise. Diane smiled. And she's right. The important thing is not to let the alarm control everything we do. Like you still work here, Emma observed. Even though this is where it happened. Diane nodded. And like you still come here to eat even though this is where it happened. We don't let fear make our choices for us. Brave, Emma said with the simple certainty of childhood. That's what Dr. Winters calls it. But she says brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing things even when you are scared. Sarah's hand found Diane's across the table. A brief squeeze communicating gratitude for this conversation. For the straightforward honesty that Emma needed more than false reassurances. Pretty smart kid you've got here, Diane said to Sarah, returning the squeeze before standing to continue her rounds. The smartest, Sarah agreed, her gaze resting on her daughter with fierce pride that encompassed everything. Emma's survival, her recovery, her growing wisdom forged in the crucible of trauma and healing. As Diane moved away from their table, she felt the familiar surge of protectiveness that had become interwoven with her affection for the Reynolds family. She might still cast wary glances at unfamiliar customers, might still keep her phone's emergency function within easy reach, might still check her locks twice before bed. But those precautions existed alongside joy, alongside connection, alongside the life she had chosen to continue living fully despite the shadow that had briefly fallen across it. Like Emma, she was learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the determination to move forward despite it. One step, one day, one ordinary moment at a time. The conference room at the FBI field office in Portland had been transformed into a war room, its walls covered with photographs, timelines, and connection diagrams mapping the sprawling investigation that had begun with one child's abduction and expanded into an international trafficking case spanning multiple jurisdictions. Agent Carlson stood at the head of the table, addressing the assembled task force that included federal agents, state police, and local law enforcement, including Detective Martinez, whose initial response to a waitress's 911 call had set the entire operation in motion. 6 arrests to date, Carlson summarized, indicating the photographs marked with red borders. Hartley and Mercer in custody. Whitaker awaiting trial. 3 lower-level operatives in various stages of prosecution. What about Clark? Asked one of the state police captains. Any progress since he was spotted at Logan? Carlson's expression tightened slightly. Swiss authorities tracked him to a private banking facility in Zurich, but he disappeared before they could detain him. We believe he's in Eastern Europe now, possibly Romania or Bulgaria, where the organization has established connections. Martinez leaned forward, studying the complex diagram that linked suspects, witnesses, financial transactions, and communication records. He won't stay hidden forever, not with the amount of evidence we've accumulated. His accounts are frozen, his known aliases flagged in international databases. Agreed, Carlson nodded. But our primary focus remains the children. The information recovered from Hartley's computers has helped identify 3 other minors who passed through their network in the past year. 2 have been located and recovered, 1 in Belgium, 1 in Thailand. The search continues for the 3rd. A sobering silence fell over the room as the assembled officers absorbed this information. The stark reminder that Emma Reynolds had been merely one potential victim among many, her rescue a single victory in a much larger battle. What about security for the Reynolds family? Martinez asked. And Diane Walker? The threat assessment is still active. No changes to the current protocols, Carlson confirmed. Routine patrols continue past both residences. The school has been briefed on security measures for Emma. Both households maintain enhanced alert systems connected directly to local police dispatch. And the threatening note left at Walker's residence? Forensics yielded minimal evidence. Professionally executed, minimal contact, no usable prints or DNA. Content analysis suggests it was intended as a warning rather than an imminent threat, but we're maintaining all precautions until the core leadership of the network is fully neutralized. As the briefing continued, Martinez found her thoughts drifting to Emma's upcoming therapy session, scheduled for later that afternoon. As the lead investigator in the case, Martinez had maintained regular contact with Dr. Winters, balancing the investigative needs against Emma's psychological recovery. The child's resilience continued to astonish everyone involved in her case. Not because she didn't struggle or experience setbacks, but because she faced those challenges with remarkable determination and clarity. Her testimony, carefully structured in consultation with Dr. Winters to minimize additional trauma, had proven instrumental in connecting disparate elements of the case. When the meeting concluded, Martinez gathered her notes and prepared to drive to Brightport for her weekly check-in with Sarah Reynolds. These visits had evolved from formal case updates to something more personal. Not quite friendship, but a relationship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to Emma's well-being. "Detective," Carlson called as Martinez reached the door. "A moment." Martinez paused, turning back to the FBI agent who had become a trusted colleague over the past 2 months. "I've been authorized to share something with you, given your central role in this case." Carlson's expression was carefully neutral. "Whitaker's attorney contacted the prosecutor's office this morning. He's indicated willingness to discuss cooperation terms." Martinez's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's unexpected. He's been adamant about maintaining silence." "Something's changed his calculation," Carlson agreed. "We don't know what yet, but it could significantly accelerate the dismantling of the network's upper echelons. Or it could be a delaying tactic," Martinez pointed out, her natural skepticism asserting itself. "Possibly. We're proceeding with caution. But I thought you should know, especially given your rapport with the Reynolds family and Ms. Walker. If Whitaker provides substantive information, it could affect the long-term security assessments for all involved." Martinez nodded, absorbing this development. "I appreciate the update. When will you know more?" "Preliminary discussion with his attorney is scheduled for tomorrow. I'll keep you informed of any significant developments." As Martinez left the field office, she found herself contemplating what might have motivated Whitaker's apparent change of heart. In her experience, such shifts rarely stemmed from remorse or moral awakening. More often, they represented cold calculation, a reassessment of personal advantage when circumstances shifted. Whatever his reasons, if his cooperation led to dismantling more of the network that had targeted children like Emma, she would accept the outcome. Justice sometimes arrived through imperfect vessels, and results ultimately mattered more than motivations. The winter afternoon was already darkening as she drove toward Brightport, the coastal highway offering dramatic views of steel-gray ocean meeting leaden sky at the horizon. Christmas decorations had begun to appear in the small towns she passed. Wreaths on doors, lights strung across storefronts, the occasional tree visible through residential windows. For Emma, for Sarah, for Diane, this holiday season would be irrevocably marked by the events of October. A before and after division that would color their celebrations with both gratitude for survival and awareness of vulnerability. Yet they were moving forward, adapting, rebuilding their sense of safety and normalcy one small step at a time. Martinez had witnessed this journey countless times in her career. The long aftermath of trauma, the gradual reclamation of life's ordinary rhythms. Some survivors emerged stronger, some remained permanently diminished, but all were forever changed by their experiences. Emma, she suspected, would ultimately belong to the first category, not because her ordeal had been less harrowing, but because she possessed an innate resilience supported by a strong foundation of love and community. The child who had navigated miles of dark forest to escape captivity, who had thought to leave a coded message on a diner napkin, contained reserves of courage that would serve her well in the years ahead. As Brightport came into view, its harbor lights beginning to twinkle against the early winter darkness, Martinez allowed herself a moment of professional satisfaction. The case was far from closed. International investigations of this complexity often stretched over years, but the immediate danger had been contained, the primary predator neutralized, the healing process established on solid footing. For now, that was enough. The winter sun hung low over Long Lake, casting long shadows across the pristine snow that blanketed the shoreline. Emma stood at the edge of the Reynolds family dock, bundled against the December cold, her gaze fixed on the distant pine grove that had formed part of her emergency code 2 months earlier. Behind her, the family cabin sat snug against the winter landscape, smoke curling from its chimney, windows glowing with warm light against the approaching evening. Inside, her mother was preparing hot chocolate, a weekend tradition that predated all the turmoil of the past year. Her parents' separation, her father's accident, her own abduction and escape. This visit to the cabin represented another milestone in their recovery journey, reclaiming a place that had always represented safety and family connection, refusing to allow fear to taint memories of a lifetime of summers and winter weekends spent in this peaceful retreat. Emma heard footsteps crunching through the snow and turned to see her mother approaching, 2 steaming mugs in her gloved hands. "Penny for your thoughts," Sarah said, passing one of the mugs to her daughter. Emma accepted the hot chocolate, warming her hands around the ceramic. "I was thinking about that night, during the storm, when I was trying to find my way here." Sarah's expression flickered with the familiar mixture of pain and pride that these conversations always evoked. "You remembered the landmarks, just like we practiced during all those nature walks." "I kept hearing your voice in my head," Emma admitted, "telling me to follow the water downstream, to look for the white pines." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their hot chocolate, watching the lake's surface where ice had begun to form around the edges, creating delicate patterns like frozen lace. "I invited Dad for Christmas dinner," Sarah said finally, "with Diane and Jack. I hope that's okay." Emma nodded, a complex emotion flickering across her face. Her relationship with her father had been strained even before her abduction. His frequent absences for work, the tension of the separation, his initial awkwardness around her after the rescue. But recent weeks had seen gradual improvement, tentative steps toward rebuilding their connection. "That's good," she said simply. "It should be everyone together." Sarah put an arm around her daughter's shoulders, pulling her close against the winter chill. "You know, after everything happened, I was terrified that we'd never get back to normal, that you'd never feel safe again, that I'd never be able to let you out of my sight. We're not really back to normal, though, are we?" Emma observed with the directness that had become characteristic of her post-trauma perspective. "It's different now." "Yes," Sarah acknowledged. "It is different. But different doesn't have to mean worse." She hesitated, searching for the right words. Sometimes, when something breaks, it can be put back together in a way that's stronger than before. Emma considered this, her gaze returning to the distant pines. "Like in the Japanese art Dr. Winters told me about, where they fix broken pottery with gold." "Kintsugi," Sarah nodded, impressed by her daughter's recall. "Exactly like that. The breaks become part of the object's history, part of its beauty." "I don't feel beautiful when I have nightmares," Emma said quietly, "or when I get scared in crowds." Sarah tightened her arm around Emma's shoulders. "Healing isn't linear, sweetheart. There will be hard days even as things get better overall. But you're the bravest person I know, and every day, I see you growing stronger." Emma leaned into her mother's embrace, finding comfort in the familiar scent of her perfume, the solid warmth of her presence. "Do you think they'll ever catch all of them? The people who helped Robert, Samuel, whatever his name is?" Sarah considered her answer carefully, balancing honesty against reassurance. "Detective Martinez and the FBI are working very hard to find everyone involved. They've already arrested several people, and they're following every lead. But some investigations take a long time, especially when they involve multiple countries. And in the meantime, we still have police driving past our house," Emma observed. "Yes, for now. It's just an extra layer of protection while they complete their investigation." Sarah kept her tone matter-of-fact, having learned that treating these security measures as routine rather than alarming helped normalize them for Emma. Emma fell silent again, watching as a pair of chickadees darted between the bare branches of a nearby birch tree. "I think I'm ready to go back to full days at school after winter break," she said finally. "If that's okay." Sarah felt her heart swell with a mixture of pride and bittersweet acknowledgement of her daughter's growing independence. "I think that's more than okay." "That's wonderful, Emma." The sun began to dip below the tree line, the temperature dropping noticeably with its descent. By unspoken agreement, mother and daughter turned back toward the cabin, their footprints creating parallel tracks in the pristine snow. As they reached the porch, Emma paused, looking back at the lake one last time. "I think we should invite Detective Martinez for Christmas too," she announced. She checks on us every week, and she never has cookies when she comes to the house. Sarah laughed softly at the simple, childlike reasoning. That's a great idea. I'm sure she'd appreciate the invitation. Inside the cabin, warmth enveloped them immediately. The crackling fire in the stone hearth, the scent of pine from the garlands Sarah had hung along the mantelpiece, the soft glow of lamps against the early winter darkness. Emma shed her outdoor gear and moved to the window seat, curling up with a book while Sarah began preparations for their simple dinner. The peaceful domestic scene bore little outward evidence of the trauma that had brought them to this point. No visible scars, no obvious markers of their journey through darkness. Yet the changes existed beneath the surface. In the enhanced locks on the doors, in the new awareness with which Sarah surveyed their surroundings, in the therapy appointments marked on the calendar hanging in the kitchen, in the resilience that had brought them back to this place despite the shadows that had fallen across their lives. As twilight deepened outside the cabin windows, Emma found herself reflecting on Dr. Winter's words from their most recent session. Recovery isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't affect you. It's about incorporating the experience into your story without letting it define your future. Her story now included terror and courage, violation and resilience, darkness and the determined journey toward light. It included a waitress who had believed her silent plea for help, a detective who had searched tirelessly through a storm, a therapist who had helped her find words for experiences too overwhelming to process alone. It included her mother's fierce protection, her father's awkward but genuine efforts to reconnect, her classmates' simple acceptance of her return, and perhaps most importantly, it included her own discovery of strength she hadn't known she possessed. The girl who had passed a note, who had escaped through a bathroom window, who had navigated miles of dark forest in a raging storm, who had found her way home against overwhelming odds. That girl was still her, would always be part of her. A thread of gold running through the broken places, binding them together into something stronger than before. Outside, the first snowflakes of a fresh storm began to drift down, catching the light from the cabin windows as they fell. Inside, Emma Reynolds turned a page in her book, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, she had already survived the darkest night of her young life, and had emerged into the dawn, changed but undefeated, her spirit intact. In Brightport, in Portland, in cities across the country and beyond, the investigation continued, evidence gathered, suspects tracked, connections mapped in the patient, methodical pursuit of justice. Some perpetrators would be caught, some would escape, the complex web of exploitation challenging even the most dedicated law enforcement efforts to fully dismantle. But in this moment, in this place, one child was safe, reading a book by firelight, anticipating Christmas with her reconstructed family, planning her return to full school days, taking small, steady steps toward reclaiming her life and her future. For everyone who had played a part in her rescue and recovery, from Diane who had noticed her distress to Martinez who had coordinated the search, from the forest ranger who had found her in the storm to Dr. Winters who had guided her healing. That knowledge provided its own form of closure, a quiet victory against the darkness that had briefly threatened to engulf her. Emma looked up from her book, feeling her mother's gaze upon her. "What?" she asked, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Nothing," Sarah replied, her own smile reflecting her daughter's. "Just thinking how lucky I am to have you." "We're both lucky," Emma said with the simple wisdom that had become her hallmark. "We found our way back to each other." Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing footprints, covering the landscape in a blank white canvas. A metaphor too obvious to articulate but comforting nonetheless. The past could not be erased, but it could be covered with new experiences, new memories, new growth. The landscape altered but not destroyed, waiting for spring's inevitable renewal. And in that quiet certainty, in that shared understanding between mother and daughter, in that peaceful moment by the fire, lay the true meaning of recovery. Not a return to what had been before, but an evolution into something new, something tested, something stronger. 2 days before Christmas, Samuel Whitaker sat across from his attorney and the federal prosecutor in a small conference room at the detention center. The terms of his potential cooperation had been under negotiation for nearly a week, a delicate dance of concession and demand, of self-preservation balanced against whatever vestiges of loyalty still bound him to the organization he had served. Full immunity is off the table, the prosecutor stated flatly, not for the first time. The best we can offer is a recommendation for reduced sentencing based on the value of your cooperation. 20 years instead of life. Possibility of parole after 15. Contingent on continued cooperation throughout the investigative process. Whitaker's expression remained impassive, though a nerve twitched subtly near his left eye. And my sister's situation? Her daughter's medical expenses. The prosecutor exchanged glances with FBI agent Carlson, who had joined the negotiation at this critical juncture. We can arrange for her to be included in a witness security program if necessary. Medical care for her daughter would be covered. Whitaker nodded slowly, the calculation almost visible behind his eyes. Weighing options, assessing risks, determining the path most likely to serve his interests in a game where all choices led to some form of loss. I'll need these terms in writing, he said finally, and guarantees of protection during incarceration. The organization has reach even in federal facilities. That can be arranged, the prosecutor agreed. Contingent, of course, on the value of your initial disclosure. We'll need something substantive today. A good faith demonstration that you actually possess information worth these considerations. Whitaker leaned back in his chair, a ghost of his former confidence flickering across his features. Clark's real name is Richard Devereaux. Former intelligence operative, private sector security consultant, resident of Vienna when not traveling for business. He manages the financial and logistical infrastructure for the entire East Coast operation. The room fell silent as the prosecutor and Agent Carlson absorbed this information. The first concrete identification of the mysterious figure whose name had appeared throughout their investigation, but whose identity had remained frustratingly elusive. Go on, Carlson encouraged, her tone carefully neutral despite the significance of this revelation. He's cautious, methodical, never directly involved in acquisition or transport, creates cutouts and intermediaries for everything. But he maintains a secure server in Vienna with comprehensive operational data, client lists, destination facilities, financial transactions. Whitaker paused, understanding the value of his next disclosure. I have the access protocols, or at least I did as of my arrest. They may have been changed, but the basic architecture should remain intact. The prosecutor nodded to Agent Carlson, who produced a laptop and placed it before Whitaker. Show us. Over the next 2 hours, Whitaker provided a detailed overview of the network structure, focusing particularly on the operational methodology, how children were identified and targeted, how documentation was falsified, how border crossings were arranged, how money flowed through the system. Each disclosure was carefully documented, each assertion evaluated against existing evidence. Why now? Carlson asked eventually, the question that had hovered unspoken throughout the session. You've maintained silence for months. What changed? Whitaker's expression hardened momentarily. I received a message last week, indirect but unmistakable, from within the organization. What kind of message? The kind that made it clear I'd been deemed expendable. His gaze met Carlson's directly. When loyalty becomes a one-way arrangement, self-preservation takes precedence. They abandoned you, Carlson translated, no sympathy in her tone. As I would have done in their position, Whitaker acknowledged with cold pragmatism. But their miscalculation provides your opportunity. I know this network, its people, its methods, its vulnerabilities. With my cooperation, you can dismantle significant portions of the operation before they have time to adapt. As the session concluded, arrangements were made for a follow-up meeting the next day, with technical specialists present to begin the process of accessing the Vienna server using Whitaker's protocols. The prosecutor departed with guarded optimism, aware that this breakthrough could potentially accelerate their investigation by months, if not years. Carlson remained behind briefly, studying Whitaker with clinical detachment as the guards prepared to return him to his cell. One more question, she said. The Reynolds girl. The threat assessment for her family remains active. Is there genuine cause for concern? Whitaker considered the question with surprising seriousness. The organization typically avoids drawing additional attention to compromised operations. In that sense, direct action against witnesses would be counter to standard protocol. He paused, then added, however, Clark, Devereaux, has been known to make exceptions when he feels personally affronted, and the collapse of the northern route represented a significant financial setback. So the threat is real. Let's say, not imminent but not theoretical either, particularly if your investigation begins to impact operations beyond my limited sphere. Whitaker's expression remained unreadable. The girl was remarkable, you know. Most children in her situation become paralyzed by fear, compliant. She never stopped looking for opportunities, never stopped fighting. Is that admiration I hear? Carlson asked, skepticism evident. Professional assessment, Whitaker corrected. In different circumstances, with different conditioning, she would have made an excellent operative herself someday. That level of resilience is rare. Carlson felt a chill at his detached evaluation of Emma, the Predator's clinical appreciation for qualities that might have made her a more valuable commodity in his twisted economy of exploitation. Yet beneath her revulsion, she recognized the intelligence behind his observation, the same quality that had led Martinez and others to note Emma's exceptional courage. We'll continue the security protocols for the Reynolds family and Ms. Walker, she said, gathering her materials. Consider including any specific threat information in tomorrow's disclosure. It could factor favorably into your arrangement. As she left the detention center, Carlson immediately called Martinez to update her on the developments. The identification of Clark as Richard Devereaux represented a significant breakthrough, one that would have immediate implications for international cooperation in the investigation. I'll let Sarah Reynolds know we're making progress, Martinez said when Carlson had finished her summary. Not the specifics, but enough to reassure her that the investigation is advancing. It might help with some of the anxiety she's still experiencing. Good idea, Carlson agreed. And Martinez? We're keeping the security details in place. Whitaker indicated the threat isn't entirely theoretical, especially as we move up the chain. Understood. I'll make sure the patrol schedules remain consistent through the holidays and beyond. As she ended the call, Carlson found herself thinking about Emma, not as a victim or a witness, but as a young girl preparing for Christmas, decorating cookies, wrapping presents, engaging in the ordinary magic of childhood, despite the extraordinary circumstances that had temporarily disrupted her life. The contrast between that innocence and the calculated evil of the network they were pursuing reinforced her determination to dismantle the entire operation, to follow every lead, to hold accountable every individual who had participated in or profited from the exploitation of children. Whitaker's cooperation might have been motivated by self-interest rather than remorse, but if it advanced that objective, she would leverage it thoroughly. Justice sometimes arrived through imperfect channels, and results ultimately mattered more than the moral purity of their sources. Christmas Eve arrived with a gentle snowfall that transformed Brightport into a scene worthy of a New England postcard. White dusted streets, wreaths on doors, colored lights reflecting off the new-fallen snow. The Reynolds home glowed with warmth against the winter evening, its windows bright with decorations, a freshly cut pine tree visible through the front window. Inside, Emma surveyed the dining table with critical attention to detail, adjusting the handmade place cards she had created for each guest. The table had been extended to its full length to accommodate the gathering. Her father David, who would be arriving shortly, Diane and her son Jack, Detective Martinez, who had accepted the invitation with surprised gratitude, and Dr. Winters, whose inclusion had been Emma's specific request. Everything looks perfect, Sarah assured her, carrying a platter of appetizers from the kitchen. You've done an amazing job with the decorations. Emma nodded, though she continued to make small adjustments to the table setting. The past week had seen her thriving in this role of holiday coordinator, planning menus, creating decorations, wrapping gifts with meticulous attention. Dr. Winters had explained to Sarah that such activities provided Emma with a sense of control and agency that was particularly healing after the profound helplessness of her abduction experience. The doorbell rang, and Emma's head lifted, excitement momentarily overriding the anxiety that still sometimes accompanied unexpected sounds. That must be Dad, she said, moving toward the front hall. Sarah watched as her daughter greeted David Reynolds at the door, their interaction still holding traces of the awkwardness that had characterized their relationship since the separation, but warming gradually as David presented Emma with a carefully wrapped package that she promptly placed under the tree with the others. "Merry Christmas, Sarah," David said as he entered the living room, the ghost of their shared past hovering briefly between them before being set aside in service of the present moment. This holiday, this gathering, their daughter's well-being. "Merry Christmas," she returned with genuine warmth. "I'm glad you could make it." The next hour saw the arrival of the remaining guests, Diane and Jack, bearing homemade cookies, Martinez with a bottle of wine and a small gift for Emma, Dr. Winters, who had thoughtfully brought presents for everyone, including a particularly special one for her young patient. As the adults converged in the living room with glasses of wine or hot cider, Jack discovered Emma's video game collection, and the two quickly established a comfortable rapport based on shared interests despite their age difference. From the kitchen, Sarah could hear her daughter's laughter, still a precious sound, gradually becoming more frequent as the weeks passed. "She's doing remarkably well," Dr. Winters commented quietly, joining Sarah as she put the finishing touches on a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "Her resilience continues to impress me." Sarah nodded, her gaze drifting to the doorway through which she could glimpse Emma demonstrating a game technique to Jack. "There are still moments, nightmares, sudden anxiety, the hypervigilance, but they're becoming less frequent. And she's so determined to move forward. That determination will serve her well," Dr. Winters noted. "Trauma changes us, inevitably, but it doesn't have to diminish us. Emma is learning that lesson earlier than most, but I believe she'll carry it forward as a strength rather than a burden." In the living room, Martinez found herself engaged in surprisingly comfortable conversation with David Reynolds, whose initial reserve had gradually melted in the warm atmosphere of the gathering. Diane moved among the guests with the same easy grace she displayed at the diner, her natural hospitality transcending the professional setting. For Martinez, the evening represented a rare convergence of her professional and personal worlds, the family whose case had consumed her attention for months now hosting her in their home, the boundaries between investigator and participant temporarily blurred by the holiday context. "Any updates on the case?" David asked quietly when the conversation turned briefly to Emma's return to full school days after the winter break. Martinez chose her words carefully, aware of the fine line between reassurance and false promises. "We're making significant progress. Several key arrests have been made, and we've recently received cooperation from some individuals involved, which has accelerated the investigation considerably." "And the security measures? How long will those need to stay in place?" "That's a continuing assessment," Martinez replied honestly. "We maintain them out of an abundance of caution rather than specific threat intelligence. But I can tell you that the primary danger has been significantly reduced since October." David nodded, his expression reflecting the complex emotions of a father who had nearly lost his daughter: grief, guilt, lingering fear, and profound gratitude toward those who had found and protected her. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything you've done for Emma, for continuing to look out for her." Before Martinez could respond, Emma appeared at her elbow, excitement evident in her flushed cheeks. "Dinner's almost ready," she announced. "Everyone needs to find their place cards." The gathering moved to the dining room, where Sarah was placing the final dishes on the table. Emma directed each guest to their assigned seat with the solemnity of a maitre d', ensuring that every detail was perfect before taking her own place between her parents. As they settled around the table, David raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, his voice carrying unexpected emotion. "To Emma, whose courage and strength continue to amaze us all, and to everyone here tonight. Each of you has played a vital role in bringing us to this moment, in helping our family heal. We're grateful beyond words." Glasses were raised, Emma beaming with a mixture of shyness and pride at being the center of such heartfelt attention. For a moment, the patchwork gathering parents, child, investigators, caregivers, newfound friends, existed in perfect harmony, united by their shared journey through darkness toward this island of light and warmth. Outside, snow continued to fall, soft and steady, covering the landscape in pristine white. Inside, conversation flowed, laughter echoed, connections deepened among those whose lives had been forever intertwined by the events of October. As the meal progressed, Emma found herself observing the adults around the table, her mother, whose protective love had been her constant anchor, her father, awkward but earnestly trying to rebuild their relationship, Diane, whose simple act of attention had set in motion her rescue, Detective Martinez, whose determination had guided the search that found her, Dr. Winters, whose gentle wisdom had helped her make sense of her experiences. Each had contributed to her survival, her recovery, her gradual return to a life that was forever changed but not diminished. Together, they formed a safety net more reliable than any security system or police patrol. A community of care that extended beyond biological family to encompass all those who had chosen to stand with her in her time of greatest need. Later, as the evening drew to a close and guests prepared to depart into the snowy night, Emma found a moment alone with Diane in the kitchen, helping to package leftover cookies for her to take home. "I wanted to say something," Emma began, her voice soft but steady. "Something I've been thinking about a lot." Diane paused in her task, giving the child her full attention. "What's that?" "When I was with him, Robert or Samuel or whatever his real name is, I kept trying to get someone to notice that something was wrong. At gas stations, at rest stops, even at a grocery store once." Emma's gaze was direct, unflinching. "No one saw, or if they did, they didn't do anything. Except you." Diane felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I wish I could say I knew immediately, but it was just something that felt off. I couldn't ignore it once I noticed." "That's the important part," Emma said with a wisdom beyond her years. "You noticed and you did something. Dr. Winters says that's rarer than it should be. People seeing when someone needs help and actually helping them." "Well," Diane managed, blinking back unexpected tears, "I'll always be grateful that I was there that day, that I had the chance to help you." Emma nodded solemnly, then surprised Diane by stepping forward to wrap her arms around her waist in a fierce hug. "Me too," she whispered. The embrace lasted only a moment before Emma stepped back, composure restored, returning to the task of cookie packaging, as if the emotional exchange had been simply another part of the evening's activities. But for Diane, the impact of that spontaneous connection, that acknowledgement of their shared journey, resonated deeply. As the guests departed into the snowy night, each carrying leftovers and warm memories, the Reynolds home settled into a peaceful quiet. Emma, exhausted but content, fell asleep almost immediately, her new book from Dr. Winters still open beside her. Sarah stood in the doorway of her daughter's room, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the peaceful expression on her sleeping face. In moments like these, it was possible to believe that full healing was not just a theoretical possibility but an achievable reality, that Emma might someday look back on her abduction as a terrible chapter in her life story rather than its defining event. The investigation would continue, the legal proceedings would unfold over months and possibly years. The security measures would remain in place until all possible threats had been neutralized. But those processes would increasingly fade into the background of their daily lives, allowing the foreground to fill with ordinary joys and challenges. School projects, friendships, family dinners, the natural evolution of childhood into adolescence. As Sarah closed Emma's door quietly and moved through the house, turning off lights and securing locks, she found herself filled with an unexpected sense of peace. Not the naive security she had taken for granted before Emma's abduction, but something more grounded, more resilient. A hard-won understanding that safety was never absolute, that vulnerability was an inescapable part of human existence, but that connection and courage could sustain even in the darkest circumstances. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Brightport in pristine white, transforming the familiar landscape into something new yet recognizable. Changed but not diminished, different but still whole. Inside, Emma slept peacefully, her dreams for once untouched by shadows, her recovery progressing one day, one step, one ordinary miracle at a time. And in police stations and federal offices across the country and beyond, the investigation continued, evidence processed, suspects tracked, Connections mapped in patient pursuit of justice. Some perpetrators would be caught, some would escape, the complex web of exploitation challenging even the most dedicated efforts to fully dismantle. But in this moment, in this place, one child was safe, sleeping soundly after a Christmas Eve celebration, surrounded by people who had chosen to stand with her, protected by systems established to ensure her continued well-being, her future stretching ahead with possibilities that had nearly been stolen from her. For everyone who had played a part in her rescue and recovery, that knowledge provided its own form of closure, not the neat resolution of fiction, with all threads perfectly tied, but the messier, more authentic completion that life itself offers. The recognition that some journeys continue indefinitely, that healing coexists with scars, that justice remains always imperfect yet worth pursuing. In Emma's room, the nightlight cast soft patterns on the ceiling, stars and moons that Sarah had installed after the first week of nightmares. Its gentle glow illuminated the space just enough to push back the darkness without eliminating it entirely, a balance that seemed appropriate for all they had experienced and learned. Life continued to unfold, complex, challenging, beautiful in its imperfection, and they continued to move forward together, step by step, day by day, finding their way through a world forever changed but still abundant with possibility, with connection, with hope. Emma slept and dreamed of summer at the lake, of sunlight on water, of the future stretching ahead with promise. Outside, the snow fell gently, covering all in a blanket of pristine white, not erasing what lay beneath, but transforming it, making it new again with each passing moment, each falling flake, each breath of the sleeping child whose courage had begun with a simple note passed across a diner table on a rainy afternoon in October.